it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. Lucid dreams are a fascinating and unique type of dream in which the dreamer becomes aware that they are, in fact, dreaming while the dream is still occurring. This awareness allows the dreamer to have some degree of control over the dream's narrative and environment, essentially making them an active participant in the dream world. But does it always go entirely as we plan? That's the theme of tonight's story, Project Wild by Tin77. Part 1. The Research. My eyes opened as a wave of terrible realization washed over me. The bad dreams were with me again tonight. The ones that I'd always kept locked deep within my subconscious, never wanting them to exit. I think we've all experienced that feeling before. The feeling of being hypnotized by our dream world, holding on to a special feeling that we crafted in our slumber. Perhaps it was the feeling of pure hot rage towards your faux friends who twisted your nighttime reality into a revival of an embarrassing memory. Or perhaps it was the deep lust for a woman that you only encountered ever so often, suddenly dreamed of being happy together. The feeling didn't matter though. We'd wake up and discover this feeling was just a strange foreign concept that our buried selves weaved for us during slumber, and just disappear at the creak of sunlight. The truth is, though, that feeling would stick with you. Our dreams are the basis of our ambitions in the waking world. They subconsciously direct us towards something that we kept long hidden, not knowing that it was not our brain that was controlling us, but our soul. Ideas stuck with you, resting at the bottom of your stomach. You were motivated to do the impossible, until your internal anguish finally rested, and your dreams became tranquil once more. Sitting on my bedside, rubbing my tired-looking eyes, I felt the feelings of despair drain from within me as I slowly came back to reality. Oh, I hated the transfer of the emotions. It made me feel like I wasn't actually in control of my life, and that another creature deep within me was pushing me towards something that it wanted control over. God, I felt sick. Not the kind of sick that a doctor could prescribe medicine for. It was the sick that caused a constant battle of conquest within me, forcing me to never know who I really was or what I really wanted to do with my life. It was terrible, and my nighttime realm was the only place where I truly felt like I knew what I was. Too bad my paradise was collapsing in front of my tired eyes. I got up, staggering to the side, looking for the light switch. The lamp already made the room bright, but my mind was adrift and not thinking straight. I pushed forward into the kitchen, putting an egg down on the stove and fixing myself up some coffee. I grabbed the paper and sat down in the kitchen, looking out the wide windows at the calming storm that was going on around me. Oh, what better way to spend a Saturday morning? Breakfast, a drink, the paper, and to top it all off, a peaceful storm outside to soothe the mood. For a moment, everything seemed right in the world. Life was cozy, I was cozy, and I felt refreshed with somewhat of a good night's sleep. I sipped my coffee, the smell burning delightfully in my nostrils. I started to read the headline of the paper, my eyes squinting. Body found in train tunnel. Cops completely baffled. I stared down in horror, terrible thoughts flooding in. This wasn't what I wanted to see. This was something that I should never be reminded of. Living alone, I was in my own little world, a world where fear couldn't touch me. I flipped rapidly through the newspaper, trying to get the terrible incident off my mind. Kitten adoption, yes, the better knowledge to know about on a peaceful morning. As I grabbed my egg, I found myself yearning that life that was always this peaceful, and that nights would be as calming as it would always be. I began to get angry with myself, staring directly towards the newspaper, reading briskly. Oh, why was reality so awful? Why was there so much death and hatred in our world when we could sit nicely in our homes reading about kittens? Maybe I was too stupid to understand the workings of our mind and our desire for every dark wish we had to be fulfilled. And I knew life would always be like this. We weren't close to any sort of advancement here. None. Zippo. It was the paradox of life. A new problem was invented every day. People just couldn't get along. Everyone had their own little problem which needed to be fixed one way or the other. No one wanted to stop and think about how this interfered with everyone else's problems. And life was going to continue like that. My troubled life would go on with all its tiny problems, which everyone in the world had. I would have to live with that. As I finished my egg, I tried to revert back to my peaceful state by returning to the person who knew me best, the internet. It knew how to fix my problems. It always had an answer. I knew WikiHow had some ridiculous answer to spur it back at me about the troubles of life, no matter how stupid it was. Looking at the monitor, I began to realize that my first problem was that I was a grown adult living in a secluded environment alone, without a real job, who was using WikiHow to dictate his life. I tried to think smaller, trying not to get myself down. I like my life, no matter how silly it might have been to my family or my friends, and I definitely got a good living out of it. My dreams, that's what was important. I was going to fix my dreams. I was pretty educated in the sleep area, but fixing nightmares and other insomnia-related problems always seemed out of my reach. Shut-eye was required for a better life, and I was lacking in that department. The only upside was that the sunrise was truly something to admire. Sitting in your house all groggy, maybe marathoning Seinfeld at 3 a.m. once again, and then seeing the pure shine of day slowly creep over the hills and reach your house is truly a sight to behold. The sunrise symbolizes a new day for me, and I know every new day equals a happier life. I was getting there. I was fixing my problems one step at a time, or at least I like to think. I figured by fixing my dreams, I could use the nightscape to fix my problems in the real world. Small ones, of course, those ones that always sat with me, nagging me as the day went along. I supposed I could discover my problems, what plagued my mind with insecurity and doubt. Maybe something within me would give me a clue. After all, dreams are the gateway to the subconscious. I clicked a link, and an hour later I realized I'd gotten nowhere. I found myself on one of those lucid dream sites that always fascinated me. It definitely was an interesting topic, but it always seemed like something out of my reach. Being able to make and destroy worlds at my fingertips really enhanced the experience of being in my dream world, but it was impossible to me. Everything that is fun is hard. God, what a terribly unfair world. As I was about to log off, I saw something that caught the corner of my eye. The ability to diminish and fight off nightmares via lucid dream. I sat back down and began to scroll again, incredibly fascinated with such a topic. It was the gateway to sleep, and possibly an abundance of lucid dreams. After a bit, I clicked away and sat down to watch Netflix, but a thought kept tugging at me as I stared at the screen. You're wasting your life. Fix it. I continued to stare at the screen, ignoring the desperate voice in my head. Do something, be something. Don't sit there. So what if it's just a nighttime escape? Find a way to fix your problems. I groaned and wouldn't let my subconscious get the best of me. Fix it, you worthless piece of garbage. I sighed and gave in to my basic desire. My life was not a mess, but that didn't mean that it didn't have some areas that should be stitched back up. I went back to the computer, desperately looking for quick ways to lucid dream. All I got was sites yelling at me to be patient and develop the mindset and all that crap. What really caught my attention was something called Wild. It stood for Wake-Induced Lucid Dream and offered a quick and easy entrance to the world of lucid dreaming. I only had to wake up 2 hours before my normal awakening and let my body go to deep sleep, but my mind stay aware. Perfectly simple stuff, of course. It was worth it, though. I could easily slip right into a lucid state and put my troubles in the trash. What really caught my attention was the side effect, though. Sleep paralysis. I'd definitely heard of it before. It's like a fever dream on drugs. One of the sites said that it wasn't as bad as people make it out to be, They stated it certainly was a strange experience. I thought back to all those horror stories on the internet I'd read about sleep paralysis and knew it wasn't anything like that. Years of crappy paranormal videos had prepared me for anything. That was a horror story, and this was real life. The difference is the people in this world have brains. And so, the plan was set, and the deal with the devil was made. I was going to go to bed and let my worries slide away. My life would fix itself with no effort. Project Wild was in effect. Part 2. The Project. As dusk slowly came upon me, I grew frustrated at the daylight. One may question how one could so easily become fatigued after a day of eating and video games, but it sure was very real. I knew now that it was time for Project Wild, and was visibly excited. The idea of an escape from the tiresome idea of what reality was deemed to be, one that I couldn't get my mind off. I could do anything. In a world where problems vanished and the inner self could be examined. You could find what made you tick, and find the terrible materials and ideas holding you back from a happier life. I was ready, and had no idea what kind of can of worms was being opened up. The possibilities were endless, especially when you forced escapism on yourself. Sitting in bed, I looked up towards the ceiling. All was still, and the lonely silence filled the room. Nothing was to be expected. The increasing sense of dread came about. At night, the air itself seemed to be a whole new feeling, which had never been experienced before. Living alone, the silence was to be expected, but just staring up at the ceiling, it was as if I was truly alone, and the night had surrounded me. And then my eyes shut. I held on to that twinge of awareness, drifting into a serene nightscape of vivid colors and feelings which could never be described. I was falling into slumber, yet I could still see beyond my own imagination. The beauty of life was you never truly understood how wonderful it was until you examined each feeling on its very own. The process of falling asleep crafted a sense which really needed to be examined to understand. I'm sure we've all felt it, sitting in bed at night. A strange spot between bliss, terror, and the fear of not understanding what the next day would bring. An hour passed. Well, it could have been a minute. It could have been a year. Time seemed to disappear. I sat perfectly still, seeing my room with my eyes closed. Colors floated around me. It was as if I'd entered a whole new reality where everything was made out of a feeling, an idea which took you to a whole new realm of existence. It was calming. The feeling of fuzziness had taken over my entire body. But then, the door slammed. My eyes opened abruptly, darting around the room in terror. It hadn't been my imagination. I knew what I'd heard. In a state where sense reigned supreme, I knew I had full control. Silence fell once more. This wasn't the silence of bliss, rather a silence of fear. An unknown event happening around me, a nightmare out of my control. It was so different from the time I'd spent living after daybreak. The world was out of control, people slowly being dragged down into the chaos. Friends, family, I couldn't control it. Every decision I made had some unforeseen consequence, one that would drop me into a deeper hole than I was already in. A hole I hadn't dug, a hole that just seemed to form beneath my feet when I wasn't looking. Every single step, every single decision. And the petrifying thud continued, slowly making its way closer. Footsteps, slowly approaching the hall, each step slowly increasing the impending sense of dread. Oh God, what have I done? I dug my own hole, wishing for control. I was lured into a trap, a situation I knew I couldn't handle. Then the footsteps went silent. For what seemed like ages, the entire house was dead. The previous noise which haunted in the distance was gone. The sound of a door opening rang out, but it wasn't a distant clamour. It was the slow creak of my door, sitting comfortably right next to me. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt as if the air in the room had vanished. No breathing pattern could be found, just a jumbled mess of horror. I could hear the door hit the wall, bouncing back upwards only to hit the damaged wall once more. Several seconds before the slam erupted in my ears. I tried to let out an audible cry, but nothing came out. Lucidity would soon be reached. The darkness would end. My payload was right around the corner, and this was just a side effect. Nothing was real. It was my imagination. Why did it seem so real? Why was my mind choosing to believe the terror surrounding me? A raspy voice seemed to manifest near my ear. Oh, but does it matter? It's real, at least to you. I'm here, and one could say I'm very real. Let's have a chat, won't we? I think it's long overdue that we have things to discuss. I attempted to scream, but no sound was able to escape my mouth. I was truly stuck. Please, oh God, please let me out of this place. No use screaming for help. I want to make this quick and painless. After all, I've been called here to help you, haven't I? Whether you know it or not, we've been destined to have this little discussion for a while. You've been wanting it. Person to talk to. I see you talk to yourself, whispering those silly little thoughts under your breath. You wish for company, and company you will get. My thoughts weren't even comprehensible anymore. My head was filled with screams of agony, wishing for whatever was out there to leave. The only feeling other than the deep terror was the long urge to see the sunrise, the light reaching over the hills with its warmth. It was all I ever wanted, all I ever needed. Please, what are you? What in the hell are you? Leave. Please, help me. I am lots of things. Some may argue I am you, or perhaps your greatest desires. Even the darkest secrets you keep locked away at the bottom of your own soul. In the end, it doesn't matter though. I'm here not because of what I am, but because of what I need to do. Open your eyes. See for yourself. I refused. My eyes were locked in position out of fear, and I had no intention of seeing whatever hellspawn laid on the other side of the room. You're curious, aren't you? Humans are naturally curious beings. If you choose to fall asleep, you'll never know what was standing in your room that night. You'd rule it out as imagination, but you'd know the truth. We would know the truth. It'd bug you for years to pass, till that very special March 12th that will eventually arise. March 12th? The day of your death, don't you know? I find it funny how humans view death. They're so scared of it they never want to face the fact every living thing has to face. They think it's mysterious, something they'll never truly know the date of. But I think most people know how they'll die. Somewhere they know when and how their deaths will play out. But it never truly wants to surface. Now come on, open your eyes. Don't make me do it. After all, you called me here. You wanted to talk to me, didn't you? Iron the little bugs out. Suddenly, I found my eyes slowly peeking open. Didn't want to do it. I was dead afraid of whatever was in my room, but something seemed to make me do it. I was curious. I needed to know what was out there, or I'd never live it down. Inside, I was being forced to open my eyes from sheer curiosity. The room was empty. I could only see in front of me, not the door to my side. Strong moonlight illuminated the ends of my room, creating an ominous glow in the darkness. There was nothing, not a single being in sight. I stared around the room, expecting the voice to creep back up once more, but nothing came. Had I moved into my dreamscape? I couldn't tell anymore. My sense of reality was gone. Soon, a shadowy mist seemed to form near the end of the room, slowly building up as it clouded the corner. It was beginning to spread out across the floor, the dark clouds pouring like waves through the bedroom. A creature was slowly forming, a monster of pure black, morphing together towards the ceiling. It was the monster of my nightmares, a cliché creature which we all laughed off at dawn, but a true creature of terror as it loomed over me. Its blank, lifeless eyes cracked open, and teeth seemed to form within it. It was a full figure, a demon standing before me. It moved forward, sliding next to the bed. Its arms seemed to extend down to me, true fear manifesting in every part of my body. I reached the point where terror had become so present that I didn't think I could even feel it anymore. Yet I still couldn't look away. The sentient mist, the monster sitting at my bedside. This was the demon which called itself my name. It was a monster I'd seen before, an abnormality I'd never wished to face. So present in everyday life, yet we only ever saw it in our dreams. What do you see? Your nightmares rolled up into one. Perhaps that's what I am. There's no need to be afraid. I've come for a brief visit, but I will still always be present. Let us begin our journey, as time is short. However, in the realm of the nightscape, time is never really present. I wanted it to end. I really wanted it to all be over. To find myself awake in a happy place, the world of my own which I crafted up in my house in the mountains. It didn't matter if terror was below me. I was away from it, by myself, happy. But the creature inside me had other plans. The creature inside wanted something more. It wanted peace, a real disconnection from reality. Let's get you that, shall we? The being said, flashing a grin as it crawled on top of my bed. Let's see how far your mind really takes you. He reached out his hands, grabbing my head. I could feel his cold, misty fingers wrap around me as the room slowly faded away. My vision was going blurry. The only thing I could feel was the icy cold, completely covering my body. And everything was dark. Part 3. The Dreamscape. I woke up, sitting in my room. Quickly pushed back the sheets, standing up in terror. I'd done it. I'd finally escaped from sleep paralysis. I was free. The darkness still laid around me, though. Hours were to go till the uplifting glow of the sun hit me. Tried to flick on the light switch, but nothing turned on. I froze, sickening thoughts twisting within me. Power's out. Listen to the rain outside. The power is out and imagination can no longer get the best of you. I heard the rain pouring outside. I smiled, nodding to myself. Yeah, the power's out and I'm still here. I'm alive and I'm wonderful. Nothing can touch me. I can speak. I opened the bathroom door, rubbing my eyes groggily. Everything felt strange, as if the air had suddenly become lighter. Everything was a bit blurry. I was having trouble making out the room. I looked up at the mirror, and the mist smiled back. Out of shock, I quickly shuffled backward, and the being seemed to float out of the mirror effortlessly. I was dreaming. This was a dream. I was losing it. It was a dream, a simple nightmare between sleep paralysis and daylight. The monster I feared had found a way to visit me in my slumber. Is it a dream? Can you really prove to yourself that this is a dream right now? right this very second, that this isn't reality? Can the lines blur so easily? My eyes met his, the red eyes glowing back at me. They seemed as if they were widening, perhaps even growing brighter. For the first time in the entire night, I knew I could prove him wrong. My nightmare was wrong. I held my palm up and pointed two of my fingers towards it. Without any hesitation or any fear, I stuck my fingers right through my palm. It was the simplest reality check, a way to see if the world around me was real or fake. You always knew the answer. There was no in-between. And the figure laughed. Oh, how simple beings strung to the concepts of what reality is. Oh, how simple they are. You knew it. No in-between. Just a plain old dream and plain old reality. If you're so in control, make me disappear right now. The inner workings of your mind pain you so much. Push me away. Without any response, I turned away, focusing on the corner of the bathroom. The whole room seemed to be as if it was familiar, yet everything was different somehow. I knew it was my bathroom. The entire place was fancier, more well done than my small space that existed in reality. I was positive no creature stood in front of me, as for this was my world now. I was alone in this room, and I was absolutely sure of it. I turned my head, was once again alone. A smile cracked on my face. A world of possibilities was now open that I was alone, the only true present being in this world. Would I fly? Eat the best slice of chocolate cake in the world, or perhaps I could even meet an old friend. How about we just talk to each other? It surprises me how ignorant we are on the surface, ignoring the problem at hand so you could stay in your fantasy world. Wake up. Get with the program. I clenched my fist. For the first time spoke out loud to the figure. You really think it's noble to face reality? And you're a hero for being with the problems of society? I don't know what you are really, but our imagination is an escape, a place to go when everything goes terrible back in reality. Let me dream, let me experiment in my mind and go to places I've never gone before. So you've chosen to speak to me. How brave. Oh, don't get me wrong, I love dreaming as much as you do. Because without the dream world, I wouldn't be able to discuss anything. What do we know when reality and fiction start to blend? When you're unable to cope with the complications, you leave it. But as you find yourself spending more and more time in this place, what is your true home? Left all the stragglers behind, facing the onslaught of terror produced every day. Before we ask ourselves about reality and fiction, let's talk about me. I think you've realized what I am by now. My eyes pierced down at the bathroom floor. I knew that the idea of what the figure represented left unanswered questions, one that I was afraid to answer, for they would shed new light on ideas that I wished to ignore. Perhaps the figure was a representation of the worries I'd pushed aside for so long. I'm you, or perhaps your other you as you might call it. I'm the things you never see during the day but are always forced to encounter at night, even when you think you're in control. So when you say you have total control of this escape, all of a sudden, the voice erupted inside my head. The creature, the monster, my own subconscious, was within me, ripping my life apart by the seams. Insecurities raised without notice, a hole within a hole. Oh, you are sadly mistaken. You think you have control. You think you can fix your problems. Well, I know, and I've known for a long time that things have been spiraling out of control. You drag every concept which doesn't fit your idea of a perfectly happy life down to me and lock it away. You think it's gone, but I return. I manifest in your dreams, show you the terror you've ignored for your entire life every single night. You really think you're an insomniac? Or have you just been choosing to stay awake in fear that the things that show up every night are too much to handle? Is this why you want control? I grabbed my hair, wishing for the voice to stop. I shut my eyes, continuing to hope to wake up, but the satisfaction of returning to a reality I'd learned to love had not come. Sounds were continuing to move within me, screams of agony lifting up from my soul to my mind, manifesting in the dreamscape around me. Once I finally opened my eyes, blinding light seemed to form around me. A pure white room had formed, with nothing but a table with water standing in the room. All of a sudden, the creature returned, but not as the sentient mist which haunted me. The monster was me, a full-on copy of me standing across from the table. Something seemed off, though, and I recognized the feeling as the one I'd felt in the bathroom moments ago. It was me, but the person I wished to be. I looked more better, more professional, yet it was still me. My subconscious knew my dreams, was here to use them against me. I'm in control. Me, not you. But never fear. I'm just you, but the you which never sees the light of day. The person you hold so secretly within yourself. So why do I frighten you? I'm just here to fix your pitiful life, reveal the problems you need to fix. Why do you choose to ignore them? Fix them. Make yourself better. Isn't that why you're here? I've come to fix you, to help you. I stared directly at him, and he looked right back, piercing directly into my mind. He saw everything, even the things I couldn't see. It would always give me the upper hand in every situation I came across. I'm fine with who I am. I'm fine with every decision I've ever made. As for it made me who I am now. Oh, but are you? Are you really? There are absolutely no regrets in your life for all these years. If you're as perfect as you think you are, why was I brought here? Something stuck at the bottom of your heart? Every day you ask yourself something you could have done a different way. You could have done dance instead of rowing, actually studied for once instead of going out with your friends. You could have given your one true friend a ride that night. Stepped back in shock. Things he was saying surprised me, even if I knew what they all meant. I never even took the chance to think upon them. Oh, you might blame those on others, because nothing's ever your fault. It's other people. Your drunken uncle made you do the rowing, ruined your life. Your friends pressured you, didn't they? But you can never truly go back from that one mistake. That was you. Nothing will ever change that. Single action. Your lack of ability to care changed someone's life for the worse. What do you think it was like, sitting alone like that, waiting for death to come? Tell me. Let's fix this once and for all. Well, I lost control. In that moment, my fear was replaced by rage, anger. Everything was my fault. I could have changed that, I could have changed this, but I didn't. And look where it got me. I wasn't in control anymore. Couldn't simply hide anything anymore. The monster inside me was in control. The table flipped over, and the glass hit the ground, shattering. As my senses came back to me, everything froze. The room was just like it was a minute ago. My anger changed everything, but it was reverted quickly. A smile of power came across my face. I felt as if I was truly myself, finally. Look, you think you're in control? My anger, my rage, it changed this place. You fight back, but consciousness will always win. I can fight the thoughts, throw them away into deeper holes. You can't touch me. The fictional world will always triumph over the terrible things you show me. I looked down at the glass and concentrated. The glass burst, and water shot out in different directions. just as quickly as it burst, it froze. The moment was frozen in place, the glass breaking and the water shooting away uncontrollably. Fix it. Fix my problem. The glass is broken. It needs to be fixed. It's been locked in place so that the problem never truly affects me, yet it needs to be fixed. Fix it. My subconscious mimicked the rage I'd built up before, as if he was ready to hop the table and tackle me. But I knew he couldn't do that. He couldn't harm himself. He had to resolve everything through me. And if he had no control over me, it couldn't be fixed. Together we glared at the glass, but nothing moved. Time remained still. I'd finally leveled the playing field. The horror of reality wouldn't win. I would stay here, happy. My problem would remain in a way where it wouldn't affect me. Looking up, my smile returned. It felt good to have full operation over yourself again. No inside force could change the way I thought. Do you really think you can ignore your own mind? He shouted, lifting his head up to look directly at me. You can't disagree with what your subconscious tells you to do. You are becoming detached from your own self. Don't you know what this means? You'll lose yourself. You'll be stuck here. I'm here to help. Then help, damn it. You aren't here to take me down as a slave. Don't make me feel like my whole life is out of my reach. I'm in control. Accept it. Accept your emotion. I make every single feeling that you experience every day. He leaned in, pinching his fingers. Every little tiny thing you feel is me, us. I know how you feel about things, and I know how you feel about this. I control you. There's nothing you can do about it. Suddenly, an overwhelming sense of emotion swarmed through me. Happiness, anger, fascination, they were all bursting inside me as a jumbled mess. My subconscious raised his hand, and I stood slumped, having the overwhelming feeling of love flow through me. I couldn't control myself. The perfect feeling of love was manifesting in every part of my body. I had desire, yearning. Oh, there was nothing to do about it. Feels good, doesn't it? See what I mean? He said, quickly twisting his arm. I suddenly dropped to the ground, all love vanishing through me. Now I felt pain. Felt as if I was nothing, could feel nothing. Felt like a dead body slumping endlessly across the floor. Dropped down on my knees, sadness swarming in me now. The world seemed bleak, as if I'd truly lost my will to fight. Nothing could be done to stop myself. I was his own slave. Emotions, feelings all channel through me. You're nothing without what lies within. You become a being who goes with the flow, unable to think for yourself. You think first and ask questions later. Is that what you want? What you've truly desired the entire time? I am your emotion. I create what you feel, whether you realize it or not. Emptiness returned. The emptiness he was talking about. I was a puppet, living how society told me to. I could be twisted into any shape or form, as long as it suited the person's needs. This isn't what I wanted. I just don't want to be held responsible. I can't live with the truth. How terrible everything has become in a world where you can be happy. I just wanted to be happy. Live a life without worry. You can be happy. But in order to be happy, you have to accept the facts. Face them head on. That's why I'm here. We want to be happy. We want to live a life without the terrible fear of everything being out of control. Let me wake up. I don't care what you've come to fix. Let me wake up and truly appreciate life. Yeah, I get it now. I need to stay in reality. I'll do that. Let me do that. My subconscious stepped backward, as if my answer did something that he'd never expected to happen. It surprised him. The whole room was becoming blurry once more. Everything was shifting and changing, and no real image could be made out. My face on the other side of the table was becoming distorted, turning into a blob that couldn't be made out. My dreamscape, the place which was supposed to be my perfect world, my paradise, was falling apart at the seams. And I was okay with it. As I opened my eyes to the moonlight shining out through the curtains, I finally smiled. The night of terror was over. Reality was now to be found around me. I was no longer in a land where the very bottom of my mind had control over me. The only feeling I had was the lingering memory of the dream, sitting beneath my mind, subconsciously locked away forever. But something was wrong. Something was different. The rooms around me seemed smaller, more cramped. My house was distorted, as if it was unknown to me. My time in the dreamscape thrown me off of my own reality. I had a luxurious house, one sitting on top of the mountains overlooking the beautiful forest below. Perfect life for a lonely man. Why was the house different? I stared down at my palms, my hands shaking steadily. I could see the lines etched in the center of my hand, stretching off to each individual finger, all the details included. Why was the world so blurry then? Staring at the window, my eyes shot down the hill towards the woods. A man was there, smiling. I disconnected myself. I let myself go. Is this my reality? A world entranced in dream, but truly hidden in nightmare. The man stood. Well, I disconnected. I let myself go. I'm no longer here. A smile cracked on his face, his eyes growing brightly. No reality, no fiction, no dreams. Just you and your mind. You're in control. You know where you are. There was a flash, a distortion. His body changed. Everything was jumbled. Everything was out of control. It was as if a videotape had started to cut to different scenes randomly. Man. The idea. The creature. The thing you could have stopped. You're in control. You can stop this. Reality can be fixed. Things can change. It's not out of your reach. It's behind him. Not the demon I recognized so often in my dreams. No, he was gone. It was the killer. The man who had done it. You were a witness. He was your friend. You can stop this, fix it, end it. Stop this once and for all. Disconnect. Everything froze. The man smiled. He looked directly at me, a big grin spread across his face. The shadow, the creature behind him, slowly creeping up. It didn't seem to move. It only appeared closer and closer when it seemed as if you weren't watching. Fix this. Disconnect. Now sat directly behind him, but the man still smiled. He was looking directly at me, unmoving, stuck in a fixed position. I knew what came next. I knew how I'd been selfish, how I'd lost control. Disconnect. The body was there, and yet he still stood smiling. I could see his corpse, and I could see it laughing, but he still stood tall. Everything was flashing, as if he couldn't comprehend both ideas at once. Disconnect. I couldn't. As hard as I tried to make it stop, leave, even save him, I couldn't do it. I'd lost control. My subconscious was laughing, if it was still there. Even if I was grounded to reality, I'd lost my free will that very night. The night I ruined the poor man's life. Well, I could have taken the high road, done something better, but I was a coward. In a desperate attempt to fix my life, I couldn't face the truth, the key to accepting who I was. My subconscious. It was what he was talking about. My control, my problems, my feelings. I knew where the source had come from. Suddenly, the idea that I could face my problems, accept them, and fix them seemed impossible. My subconscious didn't understand what I was feeling, what I couldn't confront. I'd disconnected from myself. I needed to disconnect myself, but could I? I had one option. Disconnect. My palms shook rapidly as I pointed directly at one of my palms. I moved quickly, jabbing my fingers directly through my palm, and my fingers did. Yes, they went right through, as if my body was air. I was ready. Disconnect. And so, I did. Part 4. The Visitor. I woke in a chair, the room around me quickly revealing itself. I had no clue where I was. This wasn't my house anymore. It wasn't even an altered version. It was just someplace entirely different. I sat in a wooden chair, a man sitting on the other end of the desk. It was a sight I'd seen before, one I'd seen only minutes ago. It was the white room where I'd confronted my subconscious, only this time it was dark, except for the one light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Where am I? I stuttered. You know where the hell you are. Now speak, you're barely telling us anything, the man shouted, pushing his hands down on the desk. You saw what happened. What were you doing that night? Why do you refuse to report such an incident? What? I said, slowly pushing back in the chair. I could see the walls forming in the distance and slowly realized this wasn't a room within my mind. No, I was being interrogated. What were you doing? What did the suspect look like? Answer the questions. You're running my patience thin. The man's face was red, yet he was still noticeably tired. I looked up at the clock in the distance, trying my best to read it in my dazed confusion. 12:04 a.m. How long had I been here? I'm sorry, it's just been a long day. Didn't get any sleep last night. Didn't even know what I was saying anymore. Words were just rolling out of my mouth. You've been cooperative so far. So why can't you answer the goddamn question? I don't know, it's just a blur. It seems like it happened such a long time ago. I looked down at my palm. Everything was blurring. My vision kept coming in and out of blurriness, and I felt as if I was going to throw up. Answer me, please. Let's get this over with. Please. Try your best. What happened? I shrunk into my chair, overwhelmed with thoughts. Please, I can't remember. I was walking home. Saw my friend. I hadn't seen her in a long time. I hadn't been doing well financially, and I was worried. I looked scared, a mess even. Something was behind him. Speak clearly. Tell me what happened next. I lifted up my fingers and pointed them towards my palm. I was at a loss. Memories were just flooding back. But I didn't want to remember. I wanted to stay in my peaceful home, up in those hilly mountains. I could find peace by myself, without the terrible truth. I had control of what was revealed to me, and this matter was in the past. If I truly left the problems behind, left my old self in the past, then why was I seeing this? Had I not pushed it away hard enough? This isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I wanted to feel. My subconscious was gone. I was in control. But then why did I feel this? Everything was moving so quick. It was as if I was rapidly moving from place to place, facing all the horrors in my life individually. My fingers approached my palms, shaking with immense fear. Tell me, what happened next? What did he look like? I kept my eyes open, even though it felt as if I wanted to close them forever. What are you doing? Speak to me. We need you. You were the only witness. But they didn't need me. I was happy and the world didn't affect me. The big terrible world was just something in the past. I had my own problems, my own tiny ones I could fix by myself. Everyone else will deal with theirs similarly. and I'd forget the ones dealing with the world below me. People couldn't alter me. I knew who I was. I've been the same my entire life. No one could leech onto me, change my views, my perception of myself. Even if I leapt from world to world rapidly, ignoring what was there in a heartbeat, could I find a way to reality? Or my idea of it? Then, my fingers hit my palms. I stepped back, my eyes widening. You can't ignore us. This is the truth and you have to face it. Do you know how much better it would have been for him just to recede into a fantasy world in the face of death? He knew the truth. He knew what he was facing. He had to accept it, and he had to find the courage to be fine with it. If a dead man can, then you can as well. Did he? Did he really face the truth? Was he like that? My fingers were stuck at my palm. The world was vanishing before me. In a flash, everything changed once more, and the man sitting before me vanished into thin air, dissolving with the rest of the room. I was in my room once more, sitting in bed. But this time the sun was rising. Even if the night seemed too stretched out into an endless lifetime of darkness, the sun still rose. In darkness, the morning light would still creep over those hills and rain its warmth down on all those below. Every demon receding outside or even within us would slowly back away. As for our fears, new daylight was upon us. Yes, the sun was in the air. I was home where I needed to be. The world, the terror inside me was gone. As long as the sun shone bright, I'd be in an area I was happy with. I'd reached my happy ending. I was awake. The night was over. There was no mist, no voice inside me, not even a police officer at my door. I was in my home, and that was final. Nothing else could change that. But your palms. Simply the illusion of the dream. I knew the feeling, I think we all do. To wake up and feel that world collapse around us, slowly draining away from our memory, only to be locked up within us. Those feelings would be stored inside, altering the ways we acted during the day. Paradise or hell would disappear, and only our emotions during the light would remain. But now, I was aware. I wouldn't let the nightmares inside alter my perception of life. I was here and I knew how I felt. Still, my house seemed different. This wasn't the mysterious blurriness of the dream, recognizing things you'd never seen before. Everything looked real, incredibly detailed. Perhaps I'd never noticed the things around me, but my house almost looked better, a little more luxurious, as if my simple cottage was the rich manor I'd always wanted. I went to the kitchen. I was taken aback by how nice everything looked. Everything was where it needed to be, and it seemed my problems had vanished. This was my life, my wonderful life. I looked down at my palms for one last moment, though. My detailed hands seemed to stand out in the entirety of my vision, and I felt the urge to perform a reality check, even if I felt as if this was truly reality. I held my fingers up to my palm and moved them steadily, as opposed to the horrible shaking I'd felt before. Before I could make contact, I heard a knock on the door. Staring upwards, I saw the face of a man. One I couldn't save. One who haunted my entire life. He was all right. His problems were gone, and so were mine. He entered, and we sat down, laughing and smiling as if all the bad times were finally behind us. Even the dirty rags were gone. He was wearing a fine jacket and jeans, something I'd never come to expect from him. I looked down at my palms, and then looked around me. There was a manor, a place I had only dreamed of, and a friend. An old, long-lost friend who had lost himself to a bad decision. It didn't matter anymore. I was in a place where I could make good decisions. I was in control, not some outside force hiding within me. I could only go up from here, as I'd taken control when I sat down on my bed in hopes of a lucid dream. My world was at peace. I'd fixed everything by myself. I did it. I'd proven myself wrong, that I could take control. Whatever was within me, Whatever feeling altered my ways, it was finally gone. I'd disconnected from the terror within. My subconscious couldn't take control anymore. I had my reality that I could fix on my own merits. And yet I felt different, as if something had changed within me that morning. I was an entirely new person, free from his past terror. Even if the smile of the man still continues to glow without interruption, I'll always be the witness. He still sits in the woods. Strangely, I can live with that. In the end, isn't it true that it gave me everything I wanted? Made my problems go away, even if it was my problem. I had control. I'd finally found it through the unlikeliest of places. I'd removed the problem which seemed like it could never be ignored. Simple, really. There's no dilemma which couldn't be fixed. All I had to do was leave yourself. Become the idea of yourself. Yes, I was still the witness. That could be forgotten easily through the help of good friends. 2 good friends. I was in a place where worry was gone, and I could make sure of it. But you removed what made you yourself. Are you still the idea you dreamed of every single night? Or are you the puppet? Someone who goes with the flow and changes how he sees fit? It was perfect. Reality was great. Nothing can change that. Nothing. No one within, no one without. Not me, not it. I still hear the videotape. The one playing on repeat. The one of the man standing outside. Every day before I go to bed, I see that smile and I see the flickers. I see the changes. Ones I can never comprehend. But that's okay. It's fine, it just reminds me of how I can fix everything. How everything is always in my control. And it won't go away. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Tales from a Town That Doesn't Exist Anymore by Young Seti. Part 1. I glanced down at the clock on my dashboard. 10:02 it read in glowing green numbers amidst the darkness. Almost 30 minutes on the dot since we'd entered the town. It was a nondescript little place. Short, squat grey and brown buildings with signs introducing local businesses line the streets in the areas where small but homey residential houses bunched close together amidst well-kept lawns were not. Nothing too picturesque, but a standard Rust Belt town that, although it had clearly seen better days, had kept on chugging until it was a passable, if not at times pleasant, place to live. I knew the type well. My hometown in central Illinois had been much the same. Beyond that, I was familiar with this very town, having passed through it on the way to the campsite my friends, Phil and Clay, and I had spent the weekend at. It reminded me of days past, the sort of place frozen in time. It was that familiarity that made the place stand out to me on the way to our campsite. The town marked the 4-hour point of our drive, and had been made something of a landmark as we were determined to stop there for gas and some snacks on the way back. Yet as we pulled off of the empty highway, the first thing that had begun to grip me was the silence. From the moment we'd entered the town, driving down what seemed to be the main road through the place, we'd been greeted by nothing more than the staggering silence and a smell that seemed to linger faintly. There are few things that can truly, deeply unnerve a person. One of these things is true and utter silence. I'm not talking about the silence of a quiet home, with neighbors' cars and distant yapping dogs audible from beyond your walls. No, true silence, especially in a place where there ought to be the opposite. That was what we experienced rolling back through the town that had previously been as busy as any other along the highway. With the exception of my vehicle, and that which carried my friends behind me, there was nothing. No distant roar of traffic on surrounding streets, the odd squeal of a brake, the honk of a horn, and the call of a pedestrian. It was more than just a lack of noise, however. There were no birds, joggers, or people walking dogs, and no cars on the road. I felt an uneasy twinge in my gut, like something plucking at a loose fabric, and found myself turning to my passenger seat to speak to my wife, an act of habit before finding it empty. Of course, I recalled the feeling of reacquainting myself with reality, a bitter one. She's not here. That's the whole reason you're on this trip. The camping trip had been Phil's idea following my divorce, as a way to get me out of the funk they'd insisted I'd entered, and he and Clay had battered me with it until I reluctantly gave in. We spent a week campground hopping around the state while making our way back towards our homes in the exurbs of Chicago. We passed through the town on our way to one of the state parks much further south, and it had stood out to me. It had been a relatively quiet place then, but still with plenty of folks out and about on their business. It seemed like the kind of town that still had a local hardware store, not called Ace or Home Depot, and folks had Sunday breakfast at the local diner. And when I first passed through, I felt oddly drawn to it in a nostalgic sort of way that made me think of better bygone days. I resolved it would be one of our pit stops on the way back upstate. The plan had been to fill up at the gas station, maybe stop for breakfast at the little local watering hole, before continuing on our journey and recharging our batteries in this Rockwell painting of a town. A part of me, the part seeking any logical explanation till the point of logic, thought perhaps it was all an effect of the weather, both the impossibly sudden emptiness of the place and the sort of surreal, almost dreamlike disquiet that seemed to hang in the air everywhere. It had been staggeringly sunny on our initial pass through, a rare sort of day in Illinois as the summer allowed an early peek through the spring. Whereas now, it was overcast. Angry grey clouds hung overhead, growing blacker and more foreboding by the minute. With them, there was a feeling of static in the air, and a breeze carried through the empty streets, lone and errant, and on it a chill of winter. A larger part of me knew how ridiculous that thought was. I'd seen some bad weather in my day, even a few historic blizzards. Never seen an entire town utterly empty. Yet the last 10 minutes had been spent driving slowly along the main road, my car in the lead as we retraced our previous step through what seemed to be the main plaza of the quiet town. A sign painted on a dull green background, tucked within a floral display read, "Welcome to beautiful Criers Creek, Illinois. Population 4,673. As far as I looked, I saw neither hide nor hair of a single one of those almost 5,000 people. Lights remained shining through storefronts with no one to man them. Stoplights turned red, then green, then yellow, all the same, though the road was deserted, except for our two vehicles. Cars remained in parking spots lining the streets, somehow feeling like old, ancient fossils, their presence made ominous in the terrible silence. They made my gut tighten like a fist, a pool of anxiety forming a steady drip at the back of my mind. Ring! The sudden chime of my phone shattered the relative silence, making me jump in my seat. For the first time since entering the town, for the first time in a while, I was glad to be riding alone and no one could see my jumpiness. Phil, the screen read, urging me to answer or deny the call. I did the former. "Hey," I answered, eyes still squinting as I peered out the window. I still expected, or hope might be a better word for it, to see someone, catch some glimpse of motion passing behind a window, or catch a distant eye watching from a window as if this were all some trick the whole town was in on. "Hey," Phil's voice was unusual, shaky, with a tinge of emotion not characteristic of him. I was reluctant to call it fear, but... "Hey, listen, either Clay and I are losing our fucking minds." We rounded a corner, onto a street leading to a roundabout centered around what was clearly the town park. A statue of some long-dead figure sat atop a horse with a sword drawn and a stern face which was the only facsimile of life visible. Or There's literally nobody in this town but us. I felt the blood in my veins go cold at hearing the uneasy realization spoke aloud, as though the strange reality was made concrete in doing so. Yeah, I said reluctantly. It looks like it. Guys, I'm not gonna lie, bro. Clay's voice came over the line, and even through the phone I could hear the palpable disquiet heavy in his tone. I'm getting an awful feeling about this. An icy chill rippled through me at that. He wasn't wrong, of course. Since we'd entered the city limits, the air had felt almost charged with an uneasy, surreal sort of energy. The sort of feeling you get in a place that has just experienced great tragedy or upheaval. If you've ever walked through the remains of a house burnt in a fire, or seen a town rendered unrecognizable by a heavy storm, you know the feeling. As though every inch was a warning of how vulnerable we all truly are, a stark reminder of our own fleeting nature. And yet, as we moved through those streets, taken by a silence that I could find no logical explanation for, with every bit of daunting unease I felt, there seemed a greater, nagging sort of curiosity. Something about it all bothered me, the suddenness of it. I mean, places don't just up and desert like that. People don't all just leave their homes, the jobs, and the town they've known and loved. No, it felt like there was something more to it, and for some reason I felt compelled to know what. Feels like I only go backwards. I nearly leapt from my skin as the radio kicked to life, filling my car with the croon of a sudden unfamiliar voice. I squinted hard at the radio, which had ceased working from the moment I'd entered the town, as though it might somehow explain the sudden interruption, which was over just as soon as it had started. On the other end, I could hear a similar burst of sound, followed by Phil's cursing in surprise. This town is a goddamn dead zone for signals. Radio on the shitter, my data's cutting in and out. Where are we going anyway, man? There was a diner I saw when we passed through the first time. Cute little spot, reminded me of where Jenna and I first... I swallowed the sudden knot in my throat, surprised by the emotion I felt at the memory. It reminded me of a spot I used to eat at in college. There was a silence from the other end, and I could all but see the looks pass between them at the mention of my ex-wife, a mixture of concern and mild irritation. Well, doesn't look like there'll be much in the way of service, Clay chimed in. Of course, I knew he was correct, and yet in the moment the idea of turning back somehow filled me with an unusual sort of apprehension. It's the feeling one has when forgetting something important, like a meeting or a gathering, aware only that it's slipped their mind, but none of what or how. Yeah, probably, but I'd still like to check it out. Come on, boys, I offered, trying my best to lighten the mood. Where's your sense of adventure? After a moment of silence, Clay responded. Okay, lead the way. See you there. So I did, navigating the stark emptiness of the streets with them in tow. Only the faint whistle of the wind moving between the buildings and the creak of wavering streetlights, none of which seemed to follow any discernible sort of pattern, only working in seemingly random intervals. Every so often, the radio would spark to life, only to sputter off just as quickly. I tried to keep my eyes on the road. There was something about the lifelessness of the buildings that seemed to play to one's imagination. If I let my eyes linger too long, I could swear there were figures, barely more than shadows, and only there for a moment, darting behind curtains and walls. After a few minutes we arrived, pulling into a parking lot with a few dozen cars scattered throughout, as if from some morning breakfast rush we hadn't seen. After a moment of mustering my confidence, I stepped from the car, making my way across to the door. It was only the sound of my feet sliding across the pavement and the rumble of the car behind me. The smell filled the air, like that of an old television set. Ozone. The word emerged like a thought whispered from somewhere. Behind me, Phil and Clay pulled into the lot, quickly stepping from the car and following behind me, muttering to themselves. As I arrived at the door, I felt confusion give way to apprehension, and a cold sweat began to bead above my brow. The doorway had been blocked, doors and chairs all piled in front in some makeshift excuse for a barricade. The three of us paused for a moment as Clay and Phil caught up, a glance passing between us all that seemed to carry a different meaning in every eye, though all expressed an obvious disquiet. I knocked on the door, peering in through the dust-covered window for any sign of who might have piled all of the furniture, but found only an empty diner. Half-eaten meals, cell phones, a lone laptop all sat around, the signs of life in motion, yet with none of their owners to be found. I tried to stifle the chill I felt as the skeletal fingers of dread seemed to run along my spine gently. "Yeah, help me push this," I implored, grunting as I positioned my shoulder against the door and began to push with great exertion. The two looked at each other for a moment, before Phil gave a shrug, his eyes meeting Clay's in a look that seemed to say, "Well, we might as well," before adding his effort to my own. The door gave a hiss as we managed to pry it open almost half a foot, sending the chairs piled on the other side clattering to the ground in a cacophony that made my heart lurch. Such a sudden change from the utter silence. I coughed once, then twice, as my throat stung for a moment, that odd ozone smell seeming to grow stronger on the breeze. You, think this is a good idea?" Clay asked, still standing behind us. His arms were crossed, and there was a look on his face that I didn't like. It made me feel analyzed, like I was back in those marriage counseling sessions, being mentally picked apart by my wife and therapist, both of whom seemed only to exist to point out my every flaw. I bit back a retort, tasting the venom at the back of my throat, swallowing hard despite the irritation, his attitude rising like floodwaters. "I think there's a town full of people that just up and disappeared. I think there's something I can't just drive away from." I raised an eyebrow. "You're a goddamn biology professor, for the love of God. Shouldn't you have, some sort of scientific curiosity or something?" Clay narrowed his eyes in a look of mild irritation, pursing his lips for a moment before muttering a few expletives and adding his strength to ours. The door and the tables piled on the other end groaned in protest as we pushed it open as far as it would go. One by one, we slipped through the opening and into the diner. Fluorescent lights hummed and crackled, seeming to grow brighter as we entered, bathing the sky blue wallpaper and vomit green tiles on the floor in a hospital-esque glow. It somehow made the situation feel all the more surreal and unwelcoming, pairing with the silence to turn what otherwise seemed your common small-town diner into an utterly unfamiliar and alien place. Outside, the wind seemed to pick up on the surreality that seemed to fill the air and made the windows groan in protest against it. Clay made his way towards the counter, ringing the lone bell several times. "Enough, man. Oh, Christ," Phil chided. "There's nobody here." Clay shrugged before climbing onto the counter. "Yeah, what are you doing?" I demanded as Clay slid over the counter, still bearing half-finished coffees and meals and onto the other side. "Making a damn coffee," he grunted, grabbing an untouched sausage from one of the plates and taking a bite. I felt the need to argue, but after a moment, could think of no reason why. And the place was abandoned. It wasn't like anyone was coming. And yet, I couldn't help but feel a need to be silent, as though any overwhelming noise might attract the attention of, well, that didn't feel quite as clear. "Coffee, boys? Anyone?" Clay asked, waving his cup at us and spilling a bit on the linoleum. Phil nodded, and Clay made his way back to the machine. I muttered a "no thanks," continuing around the diner. A laptop a few tables away caught my attention. It was open, the screen still glowing, though it was dim. I made my way closer, eyeing it suspiciously. Beside it sat a set of keys and a wallet. I couldn't help but feel a chill at the sight. All things no one would leave behind unless left without a choice. We shouldn't be here. This thought forced its way through my head, and I tried to dismiss it, curiosity still burning. Still, I found myself sliding into the booth in front of the laptop, celebrating silently that it was still open. On the screen, I immediately recognized the Facebook Messenger, having had to answer plenty of, "Hey, we're here if you need anything," messages from folks I hadn't heard from in years after my divorce. I felt a twinge of unease as I realized I was reading someone's messages. This was certainly already an invasion of privacy, to be sure. Now it felt even more so. Still, I continued, pushed on by an almost feverish need to understand what was happening. As I began to read, I felt icicles forming along the walls of my veins, my blood turning to icy slush and my insides to liquid. The account belonged to a Dan Almond, a slightly older gentleman in his mid-50s, and the messages were between him and another man, Kevin, who was clearly his son. Earlier ones made it clear the kid was away at college. "I love you, kiddo. Your mom loves you. We all love you so much, and I'm so proud of you," the first message sent that day read. "There's, something going on here in town. Can't explain it. Don't seem anyone can, but I don't think your mama and I are going to be there for your graduation, bud. I'm sorry. Just don't come home. Don't come back to Criers Creek. Ain't nothing good here for you anymore." "Dad, you okay? What the hell is going on? I've been getting texts and seeing things on Snapchat all day about something flying over the town. Is Mom okay?" "She's with me, kiddo. We're together. I can't tell you what's going on. Don't even know myself. I just know we can't go outside. People are disappearing. Go straight up into the sky like the rapture. But I don't think this has nothing to do with God." So Mr. O'Reilly yanked straight off the ground. Heard him scream until he stopped all of a sudden. His son's responses came soon after, frantic and questioning, followed by a call that wasn't answered. "Dad, pick up. Who's Mr. O'Reilly?" "Dad, please pick up the phone." "I'm sorry. You got no idea how much I'd like to hear your voice right now, but we have to be quiet. I'm at the Larry's with your mom. Folks here have got the doors all barricaded up. Can't help but think it won't do much good, though." I felt a cold creeping up along my spine, a cold, awful dread sowing itself deep into the fields of my mind. I can hear it now, over us. A damn thing sounds like a truck. I love you, kiddo. Never forget it. That was the final text sent from Dan. There were a few more from his son, desperate and pleading for a response, followed by a string of calls that went unanswered, and then nothing. I took a breath, feeling an uneasy tremor developing. The sounds of clinking plates and glasses as Clay and Phil cooked themselves breakfast seemed to fade into the background as I found myself reading the conversation again and again. Any doubts I'd had as to whether or not something awful had happened here faded rapidly. I still can't be certain what drove me to make the call. Perhaps it was the unease and the hope that somehow the young man would be able to offer some rational explanation. Perhaps even explaining how his father had been mistaken and the town had been evacuated due to a gas leak or some similarly mundane reason. Well, it may not bode well for us, but the longer I sat there, the less I felt anything would, and at least that response might quell the rising dread I was feeling. It was like being a child again, a fear of something nebulous and formless, yet dreadfully present all the same. The chime of the call ringing filled the diner, drawing both other sets of eyes towards me, both asking the same silent questions. After a moment, there was finally an answer. "Hello?" The voice belonged to a man who couldn't have been older than 20-something. "Hi, is this Kevin?" There was a pause. "Yeah, who's this?" I felt a twinge of unease at the tone of his response, questioning but not nearly as worried as I'd expect someone to sound when receiving a call from a stranger on their apparently missing father's Facebook. I'm a friend of Dan," I lied, hoping it hadn't sounded quite as obvious as it felt. There was another silence, longer than before, I could swear there was palpable tension in it. It was as if I could hear the gears turning in his head. I don't know any Dan. Sorry, man. Wrong guy. My heart struck hard against the inside of my chest as I tried to swallow the unyielding knot of dread that had formed in my throat somewhere along the way. Phil's questioning look grew worried, surely seeing the fear on my face. Clay looked irritated and uneasy as he mouthed a "what?" in my direction, clearly wanting to be caught up. Feeling the creep of anxiety as it began to brim over and unsure of what else to say, I elected for the uneasy truth. Your father, Dan. I found his laptop in a diner in a town called Cryers Creek. I think something may have happened to him. Listen, man, I told you you've got the wrong guy. I never knew either of my parents. Got no memory of them. Some palpable emotion at the end of his words that I could tell he was trying to restrain, yet it felt as though he was telling the truth, or at least the truth as he believed it, despite the evidence the previous messages laid out. It made my skin crawl, and my stomach tighten like a fist, an inhuman dread gripping me firmly in its clutches. The wind outside grew heavy, and the windows all seemed to yawn and groan in simultaneous protest, the sounds forming a frightful symphony. I peered outside one of the windows that stretched along the walls on either side, and could see nothing in the empty streets and even less in the skies above. The clouds all seemed to threaten an approaching storm, the sort that transforms streets into rivers and fields into swamps, a force capable of changing the face of the earth beneath it. And yet, not a raindrop was to be seen. Just clouds. Clouds behind which, if I looked for too long, I could see shapes moving within, large and darker even than the surrounding grey, but gone as soon as I'd thought they'd appeared. Search for something, anything to say that would lead us to a rational answer. It had always been in my nature, a need to be right, that made confusion feel all but unacceptable. I've never seen how it could be a negative, the pursuit of knowledge. Now I wonder if, perhaps, I simply refused to. Honey doesn't remember his father. Thought rang like a question to which I could find no answer. Sorry, man, but I'm going to have to ask you not to contact me again. Please. Good luck with whatever. Wait, please, The laptop chimed with a cheer I didn't feel as the call ended. I tried again, but there was no answer. Before I could go for a third, the account had been blocked. What the fuck was that about? Clay asked, his unease apparent, eyes darting between myself and Phil, who didn't look any better himself. I could think of nothing else to do but tell them the truth. When I was through, there was a silence for a moment that seemed to linger for hours between the three of us. We need to go, Phil finally chimed. If any of that's true, then we need to get out of this place now. Clay nodded, sliding his plate away and making his way over the counter and towards the door. To my own surprise, I felt a bloom of apprehension, feeling an argument building inside of me. Well, they were right, obviously. Something was going on that I could make no sense of, and yet, still, I wanted to understand. People don't just disappear. None of this was possible. For reasons that still escape me, I felt driven to prove it. Yet the look on their faces made me uneasy. It's the face you'd expect from the crew of a ship far too long at sea to the captain who denied them a return home. The entire trip had been for me, and though I may not have called for it, it was certainly my decision to visit this town and my choices that had kept us here. Something told me that disagreement might not be an option at this point. I stood and slid from the booth, casting one last glance at the laptop before nodding my agreement. Clay gave a brief nod and had turned to open the door when... There was a sound like a train derailing or a bomb going off, or both, somewhere close by, sent all three of us scattering along the ground. The windows shook and the air itself seemed to vibrate with a sound like nothing I'd ever heard. A strange, all-present sort of hum that seemed to come from everywhere. My eyes darted wildly about the room in my utter panic, searching for the cause. I could swear I caught a glimpse of something outside. It was quick and massive, moving about the sky as if unaffected by gravity. But that awful hum grew. I shut my eyes tight, trying to will away the ache in my skull. That smell from earlier, like burning ozone, grew thick until everyone was coughing uncontrollably. My head spun, and my vision shook. Another explosive sound rocked the air, shattering several of the windows. As quickly as it began, everything ended, the world going eerily still. Part 2. I don't know how long it was before any of us felt comfortable moving, but Clay was the first, shooting to his feet and hissing a string of expletives. His arms ran with scarlet ribbons of blood, trailing between his fingers as he picked out the glass that had caught him. He'd been nearest to the door that had burst with the first few windows and caught the worst of it, though all of our heads rang and stomachs turned with nausea. What was that? Phil asked. His eyes were wide with a look I'd seen on pictures of war veterans or victims of some disaster, a glassy, faraway stare. There was something in the sky. What was it? His voice shook as though he was close to tears. I don't know, I answered, surprised by the sound of my own voice. We should call the freaking cops or something. The National Guard, the goddamn Air Force, Clay cried, his voice cracking as fear and panic still overwhelmed him. I nodded, head still throbbing and mind racing as I went for my cell phone. Feeling like cold water being dumped overhead made the blood freeze in my veins. No signal. I shook my head. There's no service. Clay's face contorted into a look that was a mix of surprise, denial, and terror as he pulled his phone from his pocket. Philip did the same, hands shaking all the while. No one said anything, the two of them staring at their phones with variations of the same expression. They didn't need to say a word. I knew what it meant. Let's just go, I said. I struggled to my feet, the world seeming to spin beneath me for a moment as I gripped a chair for balance. I helped Phil to his feet, his eyes never once leaving the skies beyond the broken windows. Clay led the way, grimacing as his arms continued to run with blood. As we made our way outside, I could tell immediately that something was deeply wrong. That smell hung thick in the air still, but it was more than that. The streets were emptier than before. They're gone. Everything is gone. Clay spoke the thought aloud just as a cold, awful realization dawned on me. The cars were now gone. Both the empty vehicles that had previously lined much of the streets and Clay's own truck were all gone. All of the vehicles but one, my own sedan, was left idling in the middle of the street. With all that happened, my memory was spotty. I felt certain that was not where I'd left it. Clay shook his head, moving aimlessly about the street, head on a swivel, searching for his vehicle to no avail. Finally, he let out a scream, long and full of rage that echoed through the empty streets. Phil just kept shaking his head, muttering something to himself. I hardly had time to react as Clay made his approach, throwing up my hands to partially block the punch he threw. I felt a shock in my jaw, and for a moment I felt heat in my face and the world disappearing behind darkness and flecks of light. The commotion seemed to kick Philip from his stupor, and he grabbed Clay, pulling him away from me. "This was your idea," he cried, accusation heavy in his tone. I ran my hand along my jaw. My lower lip was bleeding slightly, but I was otherwise okay with the exception of the perpetual sting in my face. I know I ought to have left it alone, but I was scared and angry. days and months of emotions coming to the surface. You didn't have to come. I didn't make you. Listen, what's wrong with you? I cried, taking a step closer. Clay laughed, but it was a sound without any genuine humor, mocking and belittling. You're a snide, self-assured asshole, man. Always have been, he said, his words coated in a palpable venom. But even worse, a sort of confident assuredness that spoke of a conviction behind them, as though he'd thought these things for quite a while. It's the reason we're the only two people still willing to put up with you. It's the reason for where you are in life with that dead-end job. It's the reason Tracy left. You can't ever consider someone else's right. You chide and make stupid comments until they finally give in to you. I wanted to feel something. Anger, hate, an urge to hit him back even. But I couldn't. Part of me could only sit in the recognition that, in some ways, he was right. Stop, Clay. This isn't the time, Phil said, putting himself between the two of us. We need to go. And he turned to me. I'm gonna have to use your car. You okay to drive? I nodded, though my thoughts were still on Clay's own words. Right, then let's go. Clay's eyes lingered on me for a moment. I thought I could see his expression softening before he turned and made for the car. I followed, and until we reached the car, the faint winds moving through the building was the only noise to accompany us. My mind raced. Clay's words, the call from earlier, and whatever had happened in the diner all spinning through my head in a vortex of thought. None of it made sense. In this place, that thing in the sky, the cars, it was impossible. I knew that, as we left it behind, it would always bother me like a picture left askew, this blind spot in what I knew to be possible. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? A voice echoed through the empty streets, a woman's by the sound of it, carried from somewhere that seemed both near and distantly behind us. It froze all three of us in place. The same question passed silently between us, as though none of us wanted to be the first to ask whether anyone else had heard it. Hello? That voice again, except this time I felt certain it was somewhere ahead. Phil snapped to face it, the fear that had seemingly dissipated slowly returning to the surface, his eyes darting about nervously. Clay looked at me hard, shaking his head slowly as though he could hear my thoughts. I narrowed my eyes, holding back none of the bitterness I felt. So, some woman is alone wandering this place with whatever the hell that thing is. You want to leave her? Looking back, I can't account for the sudden defiance I felt. Perhaps my ego had finally caught up with the earlier wounds, or perhaps the idea of leaving someone here felt too much like the failure of my relationship. Well, I can't be certain. Likely I'd need the help of a therapist over days of work to understand. Days I do not have. Clay looked as though he wanted to spit in my face, shaking his head, eyes filled with something cold and unrecognizing. You're a fool, he said, and you'll get one of us killed for it. He's right, Phil stammered, though he looked as though he dreaded the words. It wouldn't be right to leave her. Clay scoffed, looking between the two of us and shaking his head. Ah, whatever, he relented, climbing into the back seat and letting the door slam shut behind him. Phil scanned the ground for a moment, sighing for a long moment, before looking back at me. He's pissed, understandably, but I'm sure he gets it. Let's just see if we can find whoever that was. He nodded for me to follow as he made his way towards the car, pausing for a moment. He met my eyes. Just promise you won't get out of the car. We'll drive around and look, and if we can't find anyone, we go. I nodded. Yeah, okay, promise. With that, he made his way into the car. I followed, feeling suddenly very claustrophobic in the vehicle as we began to make our way through the streets. And just listen for her, I said, rolling down all four of the windows as we began moving through the streets at random, listening for any sign of the person we'd heard earlier. At some point, I began calling out, much to Clay's dismay, shouting for anyone to respond. It wasn't long before, eventually, someone did. Please help me, it's coming. That voice again, much more clear this time, coming from a few streets away within one of the residential areas. I veered left onto the road from where I could hear it coming. My foot settled on the gas, an unusual determination swelling in me as the calls grew louder till we'd arrived outside a house. It was no different than the others, a single-story red brick home with all the windows drawn but one, yet the sight of it sent chills down my spine. The front door sat wide open, yet I could see nothing inside. Clay was already shaking his head when I turned to face them. "Fuck, no, look at that place. It's not right." He trailed off, unable to put the feeling into words. Well, I knew what he meant. I felt it too. We all could, staring back at the entrance like the maw of some animal. Yet, as that voice echoed from within, I felt stirred by an uncharacteristic sort of boldness. "It's fine," I said. "I'm not going to push it. Just wait here, I'll be back." Clay scoffed, and Phil just looked on with sad eyes, nodding almost to himself. "Well, I'm coming." Clay looked ready to explode, staring at Philip as though he'd grown another head. "You always go along with his bullshit," he said, eyes narrowed as he looked at Philip. "Whatever. I'm staying here. You two have fun. If you're not back in 10 minutes, I'm leaving without you both." I wanted to argue, but knew it would accomplish nothing, so instead I gave a brief nod and exited the car. Phil hurried from the back seat, following behind, and I could hear the sound of the door's automatic lock as we made some distance. The nearer we came to that front door, the more I could see the house inside, with a standard foyer and living room. Nothing unusual, but for the utter state of disarray it was left in. Shelves were toppled and furniture overturned, various things scattered about the floor as though a tornado had somehow moved through the place. Somehow, the opening felt eerie, as though what lay on the other side was more than a mere house, but some other world in which something awful had happened. Part of me wondered if Clay wasn't right and considered turning back on the spot, but the idea filled my mouth with an awful taste of the satisfaction I knew it would bring him. And so, spurred forth by my own ego, I stepped inside. The smell was immediate, like sitting too close to an old television set, just an acrid static that singed at your nose hairs, as was the feeling of a sort of chill that gripped me and made my stomach turn with nausea, my vision buzzing momentarily. "Looks worse than the diner when we left," Phil commented, looking over one of the few coffee tables still on its feet. I nodded, the implications of the thought making me feel uneasy. Broken glass crunched beneath my feet as I stepped forward, peering into the kitchen. On the wall hung a photo of a man, a woman, and 3 children. I felt something shift in me as I wondered where all of the individuals were now and if anyone would ever know. I wondered who it was that we'd heard. There was another question that was clawing at the back of my mind, one I didn't want to acknowledge yet couldn't ignore. Would we join them if we couldn't find her soon? "Help me!" The cry echoed from somewhere deeper in the house, sudden and shrill, making me jump as I spun to face it. Phil's reaction was the same, our eyes meeting as we searched for the source, settling on a door in the hallway ahead. Even at a distance, I could still see the tremors that took him and didn't feel far off myself, but I was there for a reason. "Oh, you don't have to follow me," I said in earnest as I began to make my way forth. Somehow, by the echo from behind the door, I knew there was a basement on the other side. I didn't have to look to know Philip was behind me, breathing nervously and muttering barely silent prayers. I opened the door and we began to descend into the darkness below, hands feeling along the wall for a light switch. I felt something brush past my cheek, a string hanging overhead. Upon pulling it, a dim bulb came to life, offering what little light it could manage. It did little to illuminate what lay in the basement beyond, only really serving to cast eerie shadows along the stairwell, but at least we could see where our feet were to land. "Help me! Help!" That voice again, but not nearly as loud as before or as urgent. I felt one of those unearthly chills, as though my body were warning me of something I couldn't yet perceive, and it frightened me. "Do you see her?" Philip whispered, voice still shaking as he stepped behind me, kneeling slightly as if worried that standing at his full height might attract something's attention. It took me a moment to realize I was doing the same. "No, I can't see a damn thing," I breathed back, gritting my teeth at the squeal of the staircase beneath my feet. Feeling its weight in my pocket, I remembered my phone. It had been all but useless since we'd been attacked by whatever that thing was. But the function of a flashlight was the one thing I knew it could still serve. I shined the light onto the ground below, a grey cement slab that seemed to extend through the entire room. "Help! Please, please help!" That voice again, this time so small it was barely more than a whisper from somewhere around the corner. We turned into the basement, the light exposing a small hallway ahead leading to a boiler room. In the hall sat a door, closed, though I could see a light glowing beneath it and hear the woman's voice from within. I glanced back at Phil, his eyes never wavering from the door, and he simply nodded. We pushed forth. "Help! Please!" The nearer I grew to the door, the more my skin began to crawl. There was something off about that voice, in a way I could only now process. There was an odd hiss to it, a mechanical crackle that I couldn't place. Hand shaking, I pushed the door open. The room was dark, with only the glow of an old television set to prevent total blindness. "Do you smell that?" Philip asked. I nodded, that same ozone scent hanging heavily in the air. It took a moment to process what I was hearing. As it began to click, confusion and dread filled me in equal measure. "Help me! Help!" The voice echoed from the television. That doesn't make any sense," Philip said, voice no longer a whisper as a familiar dread filled his words. We heard it from blocks away. That's impossible." The light of the screen seemed to shine with such sudden force it temporarily blinded us, bathing the room in an eerie white light, the old box set glowing like a supernova. The air seemed poised to set alight, the electric stench so strong I could feel my lungs burning. The house shook, threatening to collapse in on us as that awful sound rocked the earth. The screen of the old television burst in a shower of sparks and glass, scattering across the room. Phil's eyes met mine, a primal sort of terror filling them as his hands clasped over his ears. Something like a shriek, ancient and animal, but put through a computer filter or something of the sort, pierced the air, seeming to come from everywhere at once. All I could do in those moments was cover my ears and pray until the awful cacophony ceased and the air took on that eerie stillness. It took a moment before either of us moved, myself first, scrambling for the phone I'd dropped in the commotion, before hurrying to help Philip to his feet. "What was that? What was it?" he asked, shock still working its way through him. "Come on," I urged, pulling him towards the way we'd come, an answer already in mind. "We have to go check on Clay, now." That seemed to stir him, and the two of us raced out of the house in worse condition than it had been in before and out into the front yard. The weather had seemingly shifted in the minutes we'd spent inside, the clouds dark and foreboding, the wind whipping leaves from trees and lashing its tendrils across my face. The car was gone. The space it had occupied was almost mockingly empty. There was no sign of Clay, and something told me there wouldn't be any longer. Oh, he got him. I hardly realized I was speaking the words as I did, my mind putting two and two together. That thing tricked us, and it got him. The swell of emotion I felt threatened to send me into freefall. He was here because of me. We were on this trip for me. And it was my choice that had gotten him into this. And now... God, and now what? I couldn't even be sure of what I was guilty of. Couldn't even be certain whether I'd gotten my friend killed or simply whisked off for some unknown fate. He was right. Philip breathed, tears streaming openly as he stared at the spot the car had once occupied as if, at any second, it might return. The wind picked up, sending ominous whispers through the trees and tracing an icy chill down my back. We should have left. We should have gone when we had the chance. It's going to get us now. His tone was almost childlike, past the point of fear, almost as though he was stating the dreaded reality. I shook my head, stepping in front of him and gripping him by the shoulders. Phil, we have to go now. We can walk. I spoke, though in hindsight I think even I wasn't convinced by my words. This place isn't that big. It'll take maybe half an hour, 40 minutes. We could just stick to the main road and walk out of here. Phil laughed, a sound devoid of humor or mocking or any sort of emotion, cold and harsh. It's not going to let us go. He gave us that chance and we didn't take it. Don't you see? Skies above seemed to groan and rumble as a warning of an approaching storm, and yet there were no signs of lightning. The wind grew stronger, whipping my jacket about with such force it almost moved me. Philip just shook his head, staring up at the sky. Too late. The air itself seemed to shake as a sound like the sky tearing open above us threatened to deafen me. The sky above was an ominous grey, every cloud swelling with the threat of torrential rain. And at first I could see nothing but the sunlight filtered grey through the mist. And then there was movement. Brief at first, a flash of something dark enough that the sun couldn't pierce it as it passed between an area where the cloud cover was just a bit lighter. Everything shook, my very bones seeming to move out of place as the sky seemed to split in half. From the clouds above, I could see something emerge. In that moment, it cast a circular shadow almost 30 feet ahead, passing over the street like some new celestial body. If you've never seen something impossible or witnessed something your mind knows inherently to be wrong, no matter how hard it seems to grapple for some sort of understanding, you can never understand what I felt in that moment. I found myself grasping for answers, a nauseating sense of horror racking my body. It's a weather balloon or could find no words, every explanation falling flat in the face of the impossible. Its shape was circular, a perfect sphere with nothing resembling wings or flaps or rudders. It was a pale white, so much so that it almost reflected the light like another sun in the sky. The air hung thick with the smell and taste of ozone, so much so I couldn't help but cough violently. And it was gone again, disappearing into the clouds, moving with such sudden speed I knew it depended on more than the wind. For several moments we saw no sight of it above, yet the sound of its movement grew until the ground seemed to shake. It's coming closer. I spoke the realization, voice hoarse as I sputtered another cough, eyes meeting Phil's. He smiled sadly, and in that moment I understood that I had to flee. I didn't wait for Phil to follow, my legs pounding as I ran back towards the house and away from that thing. The entire world seemed to shake, the air itself somehow vibrating until I could feel it in my bones. A glance over my shoulder told me why. As I passed the side of the house we'd just exited, I caught sight of the object descending until it was barely 30 feet or so off the ground. It was bigger than I'd imagined, at least the size of 3 school buses in length. By the look of it, it seemed entirely composed of some pale metallic substance, almost like a reflective marble. I lost sight of it as I neared the car, but I knew very well that it was directly overhead. It made a sound, like the bellow of some horrid ancient beast had been run through auto-tune as it closed in on him, growing closer and closer until I could feel it, feel the static that seemed to radiate forth from it. I didn't stop, even as the mechanical roar rose to a fever pitch, combining with a human shriek to form a sound so awful, I'm sure it would haunt me for the rest of my life, if I expected that to be long. I chanced a singular glance over my shoulder before passing behind the house and into its backyard. And what I saw, well, I still can't be sure of. It was as though Philip's body was dissolving, coming apart in ribbons of flesh, the air around it visibly warped by some sort of energy that seemed to pour forth from that thing, floating like another moon a few feet over his head. I kept running until there was nothing but the sound of my own breath and pounding heart, long after silence had settled over the town. The shock began to take effect, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving me feel bruised, battered, scared, and alone. I found my way into the local public library. That's where I've been for the past few hours. Staying off the streets. It's not safe. That thing could descend on me at any time and do God knows what. I'm writing this because I've done all I can to try and reach out for help, but to no avail. There's little else in the silence for me to do but perhaps try and write some account of what happened here, in the off chance that anyone finds themselves wondering about the town of Criers Creek, or the even more unlikely scenario that they're wondering about me. To Clay and Phil's families, if you're seeing this and still remember them, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. And to whoever is reading this, be willing to trust the people around you sometimes. Stay away from Criers Creek. There's something in the skies above, something that has claimed this place as its own. So there you go, my dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. That was a pretty cool story for your Friday evening's entertainment. Now, I have lots of things planned. Series I want to accumulate, I think that's the right word, and other things I want to sort of push forward. Lots of longer stories coming up now that I've finally finished the academic year in my day job. I've got a bit more time on my hands. So yeah, lots of interesting things coming up. Hopefully more exciting for you than what I've been doing recently. Oh, hope so anyway. So I always hope that. Yeah, try to please you, try to do things that make you happy. So if I'm not, then please let me know. But yeah, doing my best constantly to do stuff that makes you feel good and enjoy what I'm doing. Well, that is enough. Definitely back again this weekend, probably tomorrow night and Sunday. I'm not making that an absolute promise, but yeah, like I said, some big things coming up. So back again very, very soon. Till then, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Tonight I have another fantastic one for you, and, as is my tradition, here's a little teaser to get you in the mood. The clear crystal blue sea sparkles beneath the rays of a warm, forgiving sun. Gentle waves roll against the shore, and for a moment it almost feels like paradise. But every time I look across to the water, the memories come flooding back. The screams, the gunfire, the dead who refused to stay dead. In the final months of the Second World War, our isolated island outpost became the site of a nightmare no soldier was prepared for. What began as a routine military assignment quickly descended into chaos when a strange sickness swept through the garrison, transforming men into something monstrous. Zombie outbreak, World War II, Japan. By Taxi Dancer. My name is Todorishi Chensi, and I was a first lieutenant interceptor pilot assigned to the Imperial Japanese Army Air Forces attached to the 59th Hiko Sentai of the 4th Imperial Japanese Air Army from 1941 to 1943. What I've written here is my account of events which occurred during the Battle of New Britain and is based on my own memory, fading though it may be, as well as that of my sworn testimony to U.S. Marine Major General William H. Rupertus shortly after my capture. As I record this, my time on this earth is drawing to a close. The last sands in my hourglass are trickling down quickly. How odd it is that the United States, the country which I had sworn to destroy even at the cost of my own life, would end up being such a blessing to my family and my posterity. During the American occupation of Japan after the war, the Japanese peoples learned a very earth-shattering truth, one that would shake the very foundation of everything we knew about life outside of Japan. That truth was this. The American soldiers occupying Japan after the war were not the brutal monsters we'd been told to hate and fear. Now, I'm not so naive as to say that there were not atrocities and rapes which occurred during the occupation, for such things did happen. But those Americans who did them were considered criminals by their own people, and had been treated as such. By contrast, the atrocities and rapes committed by my people over those which we'd briefly conquered were actually condoned by our government, indoctrinated as we were that the conquered and those who surrendered to us were less than human. We feared that the Americans would do to us what we did to the Chinese and the Filipinos and the Europeans and the Australians and the Koreans and every other nation whose people were forced to bow to us. As it turned out, the American general who was in charge of the occupation of Japan, General Douglas MacArthur, had proven to be an honorable man and played a large part in rebuilding Japan after he had defeated us. In 1952, the United States granted Japan its freedom and sovereignty. We'd been given, for lack of a better term, a clean slate. In 1965, only 20 years after hostilities ended with the United States, I retired from the newly formed Japanese Air Self-Defense Forces as a fighter jet instructor. That was also the year that my daughter, Inayusha, married a U.S. Marine fighter pilot and moved to San Diego in California. 10 years later, Inayusha eventually convinced me to move to the United States as my wife had passed away. There was nothing left for me in Japan after my beloved Ryoko passed away, and Inayusha promised that the climate in the States was better for my failing health. Her husband was stationed in Hawaii at the time, and I have lived here on Oahu ever since. It's 2013, and I'm a great-grandfather now as I write this account. I sit on the wide, white-painted concrete deck of my home, built in the hills overlooking the sparkling waters of Pearl Harbor. The clear, crystal blue seas shimmer under the rays of a warm and loving sun. As I watch the waves, I shudder as the memories return. July 28, 1943. In the skies over New Britain in the South Pacific. I banked my Nakajima Ki-43 fighter, codenamed Oscar by the Americans, to the right and looked out of the canopy of my nimble fighter as the impossibly huge silver American B-29 bomber tumbled out of the sky, both of its starboard engines belching black smoke and fire. Although I had very little regret at having destroyed the bomber, my third in as many months, could not help but feel some sense of respect at the suicidal bravery of the 11 doomed American bomber crewmen. Their bravery was born of a sense of an eventual Allied victory in the Pacific, and a hope for the greater future of their nation. By contrast, with the loss of our main fleet carriers in the Battle of Midway and the Americans slowly destroying Japanese bastions across the Pacific in their march to retake the Philippine Islands, our Japanese imperial forces were now literally fighting day by day just to stay alive, trying to delay for as long as possible the eventual invasion of the Japanese homelands. Hope, which had once abounded in the imperial military as Japan scored victory after victory after victory over the Americans, the British and the Australians and the Chinese, the Filipinos and countless others, was now a thing of the past. Hope for the future was almost a foolish notion, and that's what fueled our passions as we knew we were now fighting for the survival of our nation and our children. Oh, how things had changed after only 2 years, when the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces ruled half of the world's oceans, while the American Pacific Fleet's capital ships, the only threat to Japan's dominion over Asia and the Pacific, were reduced to nothing but twisted, blasted wrecks at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, blackening the waters with their leaking oil. Who could possibly have guessed that America's industrial might have rebounded in such a short period of time and manufactured so many tanks, airplanes, and ships? Every battleship that they lost on December 7th, 1941, they created many more. And furthermore, most of those battleships which they'd lost at Pearl Harbor were raised from their graves and made even stronger than before. It seemed to me that for every American long-range bomber that my 59th Hiko Sentai shot down, 10 more of the giant American silver bombers took its place. The days of Japanese air superiority over the battlefields was slowly beginning to slip away as the Americans began fielding newer fighters such as their Army Air Force's P-51 Mustang, a P-38 Lightning, and their Navy F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair. The times when our legendary Japanese fighters, such as the Navy A-6M-0 and the Army KI-43 Oscar, were virtually guaranteed to win in every aerial dogfight, were now a thing of the past. As America's pool of dedicated, motivated, and skillful pilots increased by the week, Japan's roster of trained and experienced pilots, especially in our 59th Hiko Sentai, was diminishing rapidly. However, though Japan had suffered some major setbacks in our engagements with the Americans, we were far from defeated. We were still a very powerful and fanatically dedicated fighting force. The fate of the Pacific was still to be decided. The Emperor had promised that Japan was working on developing weapons and strategies which would turn the tide in the Pacific and hurl the Americans back to their mainland. It was our duty to buy the time for that miracle to occur. I glanced and saw 3 parachutes blossom over the stricken B-29, wondering at the miracle of how these 3 crew could have escaped from the tumbling bomber. If the will to survive is strong enough, one will find a way. I pulled away, looking for another victim to strike. I didn't have to scan for long, as the sky literally glittered with the American silver bombers. Normally, we would have attacked this formation with as many as 25 to 40 fighters, but attrition and combat losses had reduced our attacking force to only 18 fighters. And our biggest problem wasn't that we were not being supplied with the adequate number of fighter planes, but that we were not being supplied with the adequate number of trained fighter pilots. These inexperienced boys were being killed off by the more experienced and vengeful American fighter pilots faster than they could be replaced. With the B-29 bombers bristling with machine guns, and with American interceptors prowling around every cloud bank, attacking a bomber formation was a dicey prospect indeed. If we had the advantage, we could make as many as 3 attack passes on a bomber formation, 4 if we were lucky and 5 if we were suicidal. I spotted another bomber to my 11 o'clock high and rolled to come from underneath its 6 o'clock position. However, as I rolled, my fighter shuddered from dozens of machine gun rounds impacting on my left wing and fuselage. An American fighter had gotten on my tail unnoticed and hammered my fighter with such a barrage of fire that my plane would soon be shredded to pieces. I was tired, having flown sorties every day for weeks and living on a diet of strong tea, rice, cigarettes, and very little sleep. That was not an excuse for me to have been so careless, as so many of my comrades fighting on the ground were surviving on much less. By sheer dumb luck, I rolled my plane to the left just as the American fighter pilot fired, which caused him to hit the left part of my fighter instead of walking his machine gun rounds up the center of my fuselage, which, doubtless, would have killed me instantly. Still, the American pilot's rounds were fatal to my fighter, and as my burning Oscar flipped over to spiral into the shimmering blue waves of the Pacific below, I opened the canopy and allowed myself to fall out, feeling something tug and rip from my uniform. Hanging suspended under my parachute canopy, I watched as the American fighter, which shot me down, bank away to hunt for more of my comrades. It was one of the Americans' big long-range fighters with a very unusual twin-engine design attached to twin-tail booms. Though ungainly looking, the fighter was very fast and maneuverable and mounted 4 heavy machine guns in the nose. The P-38 Lightning fighter that shot me down was silver, with red painted wingtips and propeller noses. American pilots were prone to paint unique nose art on their fighters, and this one was no exception. A beautiful picture of a smiling Caucasian young lady with wavy red hair adorned the nose of the deadly fighter, the name Marge painted in red letters beside the portrait. I shuddered as I saw the fighter vanish up into a cloud. And we were warned that that particular P-38 Lightning aircraft was flying against us here in New Britain. On July 28, 1943, the day that I officially became an Imperial Japanese fighter ace, I was shot down by Major Richard Ira Bong, the United States' top-scoring fighter ace of the entire war. The sparkling waters of the Pacific spread out beneath me as I slowly descended, a swirling, raging dogfight between desperate and courageous young men being waged above me. One B-29 bomber was on fire and slowly dropping out of its formation, but two fighters of my Sentai were also aflame and spiraling towards the ocean. To my shame, I remember secretly hoping that the two pilots we lost were not our experienced pilots, as their veteran combat experience was more valuable to us than the lives of the new boys. I looked down as the waters rushed up to greet me. Behind me was the crescent-shaped island of New Britain, about 5 miles to the south. The B-29 bombers had done quite a number on our main base at Rabaul, and even at this distance I could see the plumes of explosions from their bombs and the secondary explosions of our munitions going up in blossoms of black smoke. However, our defences and entrenchments had been very well made, and our forces had dug in deep. It would take many more costly strikes by the Americans in order to put a dent in our operations, and it was our hope that the attrition in American bomber crews would give us the breathing space that we needed to launch a counter-offensive. The chain of islands north of New Britain came into view as I descended below a thin cloud bank. I drifted towards one of the bigger islands. The island was covered in thick jungle, spotted by sharp, rocky ledges, and I could see colonies of seabirds roosting on the cliffs on the eastern side of the island. Well, my heart leapt as I saw structures and signs of a camouflaged encampment on a hill on the western side of the island. Surely it was a Japanese base camp, as there was no known American or Allied bases operating in this area, although I was not aware that we had established an outpost on this island. More than likely, because of the extensive camouflage used to hide it from our Allied air attack, it was probably one of our observation and listening posts, used to give early warning to our command in Rabaul of an Allied amphibious assault on New Britain. And as luck would have it, the tropical winds were pushing me eastwards, away from the island and back over the water. I did not want to risk being dragged too far from the shore, so at about 100 meters from the beach and 30 meters above the waves, I released the harness to my parachute and allowed myself to plunge into the water. I hit the warm waters feet first, and immediately became disoriented, not knowing how far I had sunk into the ocean. We'd been told to look at the direction in which the bubbles were going in order to determine which way was up, but that was an easy thing to say. It's much harder when you are flailing around under the water and there are bubbles everywhere. I was never a particularly good swimmer, never liked being submerged in dark waters, especially waters known to be infested with the sharks. Fortunately, I was wearing a life vest, and despite my best efforts to accidentally drown myself, this life vest pulled me to the surface of the water. Though I was tired from many weeks of lack of sleep and lack of decent food, and probably still in shock at having been shot down so quickly, I somehow found the energy to swim, paddle, and drag myself onto the beach. Thoughts of monstrous sharks stalking underneath and behind me motivating my weary muscles. My legs ached as if on fire when my feet finally touched the sandy beach, but they held me aloft just long enough for me to walk a few steps towards where the sand was white, warm, and dry, before giving out. I fell face first on that sun-baked beach, exhausted, but happy to be alive. I do not know how long I allowed myself to rest there, covered now from head to foot in gritty white sand, but the sun was still high in the clear blue sky when my brain awakened me and told me that it was time to press on. Light-headed and dizzy, I walked back into the shallows, washing the sand from my face, hair, and uniform. I took stock of what provisions I had with me: water, a compass, a signal mirror, and a survival knife. To my dismay, however, I'd lost my pistol, which was in a holster that had been ripped away when I fell out of the cockpit. I contemplated briefly about resting under the shades of the palm trees, which grew around the beach, tempted as I was to perhaps get a few hours of sleep before I made my way across the island to our encampment on the western part. But my Sentai was already short on experienced pilots, and allowing myself even an hour of sleep while my comrades were in desperate need of pilots would be inexcusable. I'd have to navigate towards the south, as the cliffs which lined the northern end of the beach were high and impassable. Once I found a path off the beach, my plan was to steadily move westwards toward the hill where I saw our observation post. I estimated that it was about 3 miles west of my current location, but my detour around the cliffs would probably add another mile or more to the journey. Coupled with navigating the unknown jungle terrain, I could be at our base before nightfall if all went well. If fortune smiled upon me, they would have a radio and I could be back to my airbase in Rabaul as early as tomorrow. Before setting off, I took out my canteen and took a drink of the fresh, lukewarm water. Not realizing how thirsty I'd become, I'd finished half the canteen before I took it from my lips. Feeling more refreshed and confident that I'd run across a stream of some sort to refill my water supply, I set off to the south and plunged into the thick jungle. I immediately became aware of the most oppressive humidity that hung in the air, which made breathing somewhat difficult. Realizing that I was still wearing my life vest, I removed the heavy covering and placed it over a fallen palm tree, intending to retrieve it later on after I'd been rescued. I removed the top part of my pilot uniform, tying it around my waist with the sleeves. Then I took the white kerchief from my neck and tied it around my forehead to keep the sweat from pouring into my eyes. Keeping only my water, knife, compass and signal mirror, I pressed on deeper into the sweltering jungle. The canopy of leaves overhead cast everything in a dim grey-green hue, hiding the rays of the sun but trapping the hot air near the ground like a sauna. The jungle was alive with the sounds of life. Chittering monkeys, insects buzzing. The call of strange birds echoed throughout a jungle canopy which seemed to envelop me in a lush green embrace. I pushed onwards, feeling as if I were now drowning in a sea of intense green foliage. I looked around for a trail which may lead to a water source and eventually stumbled upon a narrow one, perhaps made by the wild boar which inhabited these islands. Weary also of the many species of venomous snakes which crawled through the underbrush, I followed the trail until the trees began to thin out slightly, and I could just see a line of hills in the distance looming over the jungle floor. I could hear the sound of water splashing, hidden somewhere beyond my weary and sweat-soaked vision as I stumbled forwards again. The trail emerged in a clearing where I was met by a tragic but not unexpected sight. A decaying twin-engine aircraft had made its final resting place here in this forgotten jungle island. Both wings and tail had been torn away by either machine gun fire or by the unforgiving jungle into which it had crashed, but the fuselage had remained relatively intact. It was an Australian Lockheed Hudson light bomber, which we'd no doubt shot down when our forces soundly defeated the Australians in January of last year. A large glass turret bubble was mounted on the top of the fuselage near the rear of the bomber, which was thoroughly shot up. The twin machine guns bowed and rusting in defeat. The door behind the wing was hanging ajar, so, with a sense of morbid curiosity, I cautiously crept inside. There was a heavy scent of must and mold within the carcass of the wreckage as I climbed inside, watchful of any snakes or giant venomous spiders or insects which may have made this wreck their new home. The body of the long-dead Australian turret gunner still sat in his seat, dead arms raised over an emaciated skull as if trying to protect himself from the hail of bullets which had killed him. The thin metal creaked under my boots as I turned to walk towards the cockpit. The fetid smell of decay hung in the humid air as I approached the pilot seat. The cockpit glass shattered away. From behind, I could see the pilot sitting slumped over in the seat, and I stopped, wondering if it was worth going any further. Suddenly I heard a noise, as if a body was shuffling, coming from in front and under the cockpit where the glassed-in nose was located. That was the position where the bombardier was stationed, and I hesitated, fearing that some unseen jungle predator was making a meal of the rancid corpse of this unfortunate airman. And that was when the head of the pilot turned to me, looking over its shoulder and staring at me with malevolent, empty eye sockets. His mouldy skeletal arms reached out to me, but his seat restraints held him in place. Too shocked to breathe, much less scream, I saw a second skeletal hand reach up from the bombardier's position, while behind me, the turret gunner's legs started swinging wildly in its seat. Part 2. I bounded out of the door and ran across the clearing, not daring to look back at what was making the scratching and clawing noises from inside the bowels of that cursed bomber. The clearing was relatively open of any obstructing trees and foliage, and, not paying any attention to the direction I was going, I simply took the path of least resistance as I dove headlong through the jungle. Vines, thorns, and branches clawed at my legs, arms, and face as I desperately fought to put distance between me and the unholy horror which I'd just witnessed. The path led towards the sound of the splashing water, and as I ran, I stepped across an embankment hidden by the jungle undergrowth. I tumbled head over heels down a hill, grabbing roots and vines, and saw bladed grass until I rolled out from under the jungle canopy and came out into the light of another part of the beach. Looking out towards the ocean, I saw a community of thatch-roofed huts built on stilts over the bright blue waters, each dwelling connected by wooden bridges. I had no time to take in the idyllic tropical paradise that I was seeing as I scrambled back up the embankment which I just tumbled down, cautiously peering behind me to see if I'd been followed. An empty trail and an empty jungle stared back at me. I slid back down the embankment and shuffled towards a palm tree and sat down, resting with my back to the jungle and facing the beach and the community of thatch huts built over the shallow blue waves. It was, admittedly, a calming and beautiful view, with the warm winds blowing, the blue waters dancing, and the small community of huts seemingly existing without a care in the world. It was as if the war had not touched this little stretch of beach. Well, it had to have been my imagination. A trick of the light. The unstable aircraft shifting because of my added weight. The humid jungle breeze blowing through the holes in the bullet-ridden fuselage. Dehydration, or perhaps even a concussion from when I'd bailed out of my plane. Any one of these things could easily explain what I'd seen inside that long-dead bomber. The dead could not simply come back to life. It just wasn't possible. Well, I don't know for how long I sat there, slumped underneath the shade of the palm tree. The warm winds and the gentle lullaby of the waves crashing to shore had lulled me into a fitful sleep. I awoke with a start. Dreams of screaming bombers and fighters falling out of the sky in flames, and of some unseen horror stalking ever closer to me from the shadows. I jumped up, disoriented and waving my knife at monsters that weren't there. It was still daylight, although the sun had sunk closer to the seas now. Flies and other insects buzzed around my sweating face and neck, reminding me of the dream I had of buzzing fighter planes fighting and dying over the skies of New Britain. And the other thing? The horrific vision that I saw inside that long-dead bomber? Perhaps that was a dream as well. Suddenly feeling dizzy, I drank almost the entire supply of water left in my canteen. It was time to be moving again. I stared once more at the small community of thatch huts, about 5 or 6 of them built on stilts over the crystal blue waters. Strangely, the community seemed completely abandoned, although I could clearly see several dugout canoes tied to the posts underneath the huts. Hoping to find some fresh water and supplies for perhaps a little food, I decided to spare a few minutes to investigate the tranquil-looking little fishing community before setting off again into the jungle. Oh, how I wish that I didn't. As I walked down the beach, I could see that the community of thatch huts wasn't as tranquil or as peaceful as it looked in the distance. The sides of 4 of the huts looked to have been torn open from the outside and in. Wooden dishes and bowls were scattered about, and strings of dried fish hung rotting and uneaten in strings. The smell of rotten and decaying fish mixed with the buzzing sounds of flies. And there was also another scent, one that I knew too well. Against my better judgment, I walked upon the wooden planks which led from the shore up to the huts over the water, the scent of rotten death getting stronger with each step. I stopped. Inside, I could see a body. A girl. She was laying face down, her arms splayed out before her. From her waist down, the flesh was torn away, as if flayed away by some ravenous beast, exposing bones. Flies and maggots crawled all over the exposed, rotting meat. And then it, whatever the thing had become, lifted her head and moaned. It crawled towards me, grabbing hungrily. I turned and ran. I ran as quickly as I could down the way I'd come and back into the jungle with energy that I didn't know I had. Don't know how far I ran or for how long, nor did I know that I was screaming until I ran through a stream running with cold water and emerged into another clearing. The nightmare didn't end there, though. In the middle of the clearing was a dingy white parachute draped over some branches to form a makeshift shelter. Underneath the shade, there were 2 Americans wearing the uniform of bomber pilots. They were 2 of the Americans who'd survived the bomber which I'd shot down. They were struggling on the ground, vainly trying to fend off 6 undead things which were methodically and cruelly tearing them apart. More of the undead, all wearing Japanese army uniforms, emerged from the jungle to join in the feast as the Americans stopped struggling. "Oh, you fucking savages!" came a yell from behind me. I felt a hard hit to the back of my neck and I fell to the ground, vaguely aware of another big American wearing a bomber crew uniform standing over me. "What the hell are you people doing?" he yelled again, and the undead looked towards us. The American clenched his fists. "You get away from them! You get away from my crew!" No, I yelled as I wrapped my arms around the waist of the big American, pulling him backwards away from the gore-soaked comrades. "They're dead. They're dead. If they catch you, they'll kill you too." The American swung his elbow backwards, catching me in the jaw and knocking me down. He stared down at me with a mixture of hatred and anger, and shock at the fact that I'd spoken to him in English. I was on my back, kicking my knees and scrambling backwards over the fallen leaves while pointing behind the angry American. "Watch out! They're behind you!" Confused, but with murderous intent in his eyes, the American clenched his fists and stalked towards me as I turned to get on my feet. Suddenly, somewhere off to my left came the screams of panicked men, followed by the sound of rifles firing. The voices were Japanese. Without turning, I raced back down the embankment and fought through the trees and tangled vines as I pushed to get through to where I'd heard my comrades. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of branches breaking and underbrush crunching. I ran faster, not knowing if it was the American chasing me or the unholy ghouls which had suddenly come to life and had a hunger for living flesh. My mind was racing as fast as my feet, trying to come to terms with what was going on. This was madness. Did I actually die when I was shot down? Had I been condemned to this hell? A small rise came up before me, a line of trees and thick leafy shrubs separating me from my comrades on the other side. I leapt up the rise, thankful that I could hear many Japanese voices on the other side. And something pulled me down from behind, strong arms pinning me while a thick hand covered my mouth. I was dragged to a half-sitting position on the ground behind the trunk of a thick palm tree. "Sorry," said the American. "You're not giving my position away to your buddies." Well, I struggled to break free, but realized it was hopeless. He could break my neck if he wished. I could feel his heavy breath on the back of my neck as we both lay on the ground, looking up from under the bushes at what was going on at the other side. Perhaps only 5 meters away, I could see the booted feet of about 6 or 7 Japanese infantrymen shouting and firing at some unseen thing in the distance. They were in another shallow clearing about 10 meters in diameter, surrounded by thick vegetation, and the soldiers were clearly in a panicked state. Suddenly, the sounds of moaning, like a harsh wind bellowing through a grave, began to echo across the clearing. The battle was brief and hopeless, as the Japanese infantrymen fired desperately as about 20 of the undead shambled out of the bush, the unholy monsters wearing Japanese army uniforms, as well as others who wore uniforms of long-dead Australian and American servicemen. More of the ghouls emerged behind the surrounded Japanese soldiers, and soon they were overwhelmed. I shut my eyes tightly as I heard the living Japanese soldiers screaming and pleading for several long and agonizing minutes. I wanted to cover my ears and cry as I heard the sound of flesh being ripped and chewed. But I was terrified that my breathing would attract those things. Soon, the screaming ended, replaced by tortured moaning. We remained motionless under those bushes as the sound of shambling feet from the opposite side of the embankment slowly faded. The American relaxed his grip on my collar, but did not release me. "What the hell is going on here?" he hissed. I shook my head. I don't know." "How the hell did you learn to speak English?" the American said. "My father worked at the consulate in London," I said. "I lived in England for 5 years before the war." He released me and pushed me backwards. I lost my balance and fell. The American put his hands on his hips and turned back in the direction that we'd just run. What the hell did I just see back there? Those things ate your buddies. They ate my friends. What the hell is going on here? I don't know what is going on here," I said. I got up and slowly, pulling my knife from its sheath and contemplating attacking the American while his back was turned, said, "I was shot down, same as you. Whatever is going on here, it is a danger to the both of us." I released my grip on the knife and slid it back into its sheath then. "Good move," said the American as he turned to face me again. "If you'd have pulled out that knife, we'd have some serious issues." We stood facing each other, each of us unsure whether the other man was a threat. The American stood over 2 meters tall, big with broad shoulders, tan skin, and dirty brown hair. He was unarmed and his hands were down by his side, but he looked at me as if daring me to unsheath my knife. "Hey, what's your name?" he asked. "I am Lieutenant Todorishi Shensi of the 59th Fighter Air Squadron. You?" "Lieutenant Samson Gabriel, flight engineer, 17th Bombardment Squadron." "Well, it appears, Lieutenant Gabriel," I said, "that we are in somewhat of a difficult situation. I believe that if we are to get off this island alive, it would be better if we put aside our personal differences for now. But if you call me that name one more time, we will, as you say, have some serious issues." Lieutenant Gabriel grunted. "God, are you little slanty-eyed people so long-winded?" He turned suddenly as the sounds of moaning began echoing through the trees, followed by the sound of brush being crushed under many booted feet. "Quickly," I said. "This way." I ran westwards, following the direction of the sun overhead. I could hear the American following close behind me as, all around us, we could see shadows moving through the trees and heard the haggard wailing of tortured voices. We moved away from the shadows, taking our steps more slowly and quietly. Every once in a while, we'd stop and listen to the jungle around us before getting up and proceeding deeper into the jungle. Soon we stopped again, crouching down to listen. To our left and ahead of us, we could hear the bubbling sounds of flowing water, and we cautiously followed the noise to its source. We emerged at a drop-off where a wide stream of clear water flowed. On the opposite side, the jungle rose steeply upwards. We followed the bank upstream for a while, until we found a place where the ground dipped and formed a narrow bank. Making sure that there were no threats around us, the American and I stepped out on the shaded bank, which was covered in smooth, round stones. The rapidly flowing stream was only knee-deep, and the water was refreshingly cold. I emptied my canteen of now warm water and refilled it with water from the stream and drank my fill. Beside me, Gabriel knelt and cupped his hands in the water, washing the sweat and dirt from his face. I handed him my canteen and he accepted it gratefully. A fairly large, moss-covered boulder lay in the stony bank near the water, and we rested with our backs against it, warily keeping our eyes and ears alert to the sounds of any threats which might suddenly emerge from the jungle. "Hey, why are we headed west, Chancy?" asked Gabriel above the noise of the flowing stream. He refilled my empty canteen with the cold water and handed it back to me. "I saw an observation post on a hill to our west when I parachuted here," I answered, taking another gulp of water. "Well, I don't know if you've noticed," said Gabriel, but west seems to be where those things are coming from. I know, I replied, but there's bound to be a radio at the outpost. It's the only way we can call for help. Gabriel leaned back against the rock, the obvious question left unanswered. If we managed to avoid those things and made it to the outpost, and if I were able to call for help, then the best that Lieutenant Gabriel could hope for was to spend the rest of the war as a POW. I didn't think that suited the big American, and fully expected him to take some kind of action to avoid that fate. I would do the same had the situation been reversed. Yes, I'd have to keep an eye on him. Part 3. I woke up with Gabriel's big hand wrapped around my mouth and nose, his other hand on the hilt of my knife. My eyes went wide as I looked around. The sun had dipped below the hill opposite of us. How long had I been asleep? How stupid could I have been? He was behind me, and I struggled to release Gabriel's grip on my knife. Shh, he whispered. Jesus, Chensi, your snores could wake the dead. He slowly took his hand from my mouth and pointed around the boulder towards the opposite bank of the stream. Movement, he whispered. I nodded as he released me, and we silently crawled to the edge of the boulder. As we peered around, a high-pitched grunt suddenly filled the air as a wild boar emerged from the jungle and splashed into the water a few meters away from us. Initially, it ran in our direction, but upon seeing us, the terrified creature turned and ran in the opposite direction down the stream. Behind it, several undead creatures clawed their way from the foliage and clumsily shambled into the water, turning in the direction of the squealing animal. 4 of the bloody gore-soaked creatures wore the uniform of Japanese soldiers. A 5th undead creature, also Japanese, wore a torn, white lab coat now stained red with blood and entrails. The last 3 walking corpses were Caucasians, 2 wearing the uniform of American soldiers and 1 wearing the uniform of an Australian. They seemed to have been deceased for longer than the Japanese, as their skin was more taut and decayed and their uniforms were more ragged and torn. One of them stumbled and fell into the water, the flailing corpse being dragged downstream. I held my breath as I watched the corpses shamble away from us. We didn't move for several more minutes, waiting to see what other nightmares would emerge from the opposite bank. After a while, Gabriel nudged me. Hey, let's go find that observation post of yours before the sun goes down. Nodding, I cautiously stood up and began wading towards the opposite bank, careful to avoid the spot where the undead creatures had emerged. Gabriel slipped several of the smooth round stones into his pocket and followed me. Soon we were again embraced by the jungle, and painfully aware that our chances for encountering more of those things increased with every step we took towards the outpost. My mind was racing. Were those dead Japanese soldiers from the outpost? Was there anyone still alive there? Why was there a corpse wearing a laboratory coat? Why were there Allied soldiers amongst the walking dead? We were making slow progress as the terrain began to slope upwards, but fortunately we didn't encounter any more of those things. There was a clearing at the top of the hill, which then ran down into a shallow valley. We laboriously climbed to the top of the hill, slowing near the top as the fetid stench of death wafted through the air. The American and I emerged once again in a clearing surrounded by trees. Leaning with its back against a tree was the partially devoured body of a Japanese soldier, a pistol in his hand and a hole in the back of his head. Flies, ants, and other insects covered the corpse's head and exposed entrails. He wears the rank of a colonel, I said. Why would a senior army officer be here where there's only a small secluded outpost? And, why didn't he rise like the others? Asked Gabriel. Perhaps it's because he shot himself in the head, I speculated. Gabriel walked towards the corpse, staring doubtfully at it for a moment before suddenly reaching down and prying the pistol from its hand. Seeing the empty chamber, he tossed it back down. Well, looks like he saved the last bullet for himself, he said in a disappointed tone. The outpost is close, I replied. Where? Asked Gabriel. I pointed to the top of a ridgeline which was over the next rise, where camouflage netting blended seamlessly with the trees. Gabriel squinted his eyes. Do you see it? Yeah, Gabriel replied. Looks like it's built directly into the side of the hill. More like a bunker complex rather than a simple observation post to me. I nodded in agreement. The bunker complex, as Gabriel called it, was constructed on a wide and flat ledge just below the crest of the hill, with what appeared to be structures acting as entrances leading into the hill itself. Radio antennae, which could easily be mistaken for tree branches, stuck up through the top of the camouflage netting. At least we knew they had at least one radio in there. A clearing surrounded the bunker complex of about 100 meters before the perimeter ended at the jungle once again. There was no movement that I could see, the bunker complex looking as quiet and tranquil as the huts built over the waves. I shuddered with dread. "We should go," I said. The sun was dropping rapidly as we ducked down as low as we could and scrambled across the open field before diving into an open, fighting defensive position. In the foxhole were puddles of drying blood and scraps of torn flesh. There was also a light machine gun in the fighting position, strangely pointing back in the direction of the bunker complex. Lieutenant Gabriel made to take the weapon, but I stopped him. "No, Lieutenant," I said. "I believe that they are attracted to the noise. If we should fire that, we will attract them back towards us. We would be better off if we relied more on stealth." The American regarded me doubtfully, and then nodded, putting the machine gun back down. We silently crept the rest of the way to the main gate, which had looked to have been pushed violently open. The guard tower at the gate had been abandoned, blood staining the sandbags which surrounded it. The sun had dipped just below the horizon, and long black shadows swallowed the complex. From the corners of my eyes, I could see shadows shambling around the perimeter of the base. Making sure that the guard tower was empty, we silently made our way up and very quietly shut the door of the shack. "There's the radio room," I said, pointing to a set of stone steps which led up to a wooden shack with heavily sandbagged sides, nestled almost comfortably under camouflage netting. It was located near a strand of palm trees at the edge of the bunker complex, just outside the entrance which led into the hill. "We should be able to get in there and call for help." As the light slowly faded, I could see the shadows on Gabriel's face. By the look of him, I knew that we were thinking the same thing. "We need to find out what the hell's happening," said Gabriel. "We need to find out what the hell your people are doing here. The only way we're going to do that is to go into that bunker." "I know," I nodded. "We'd have a better chance to get around at night." Slowly, we climbed down from the guard tower and made our way to the bunker entrance, sneaking around some makeshift thatch huts which we assumed had been used as living quarters for the soldiers. On more than one occasion, we almost ran into a ghoul randomly shambling about, moaning and stinking. We took shelter inside one of the abandoned huts and peered out of the open window towards the entrance of the bunker, which led into the depths of the mountain. It was blanketed in total blackness. "Come on, Chancy," whispered Gabriel. We crept around the corner of the shack and I grabbed the American before we made our final dash to the entrance. "Gabriel, do you still have those rocks?" He stopped and then nodded. Reaching into his pockets, he took out 2 good-sized rocks. He threw one into the concrete blast wall which lined the entrance of the bunker, and the crack noise it made echoed dully. We waited a couple of tense seconds and were rewarded when a dull moan emerged from the shadows, followed by an undead soldier appearing from the shadows. Gabriel took his second stone and tossed it on the stone steps which led up to the radio room. The ghoul turned its head and followed the sound of the stone clacking. After waiting a few more seconds, we ran into the pitch-black entrance. We found ourselves in a surprisingly wide hallway lined with heavy wooden planks which was angled downwards deeper into the mountain. More surprisingly, the emergency lighting was still working, and the depths of the bunker were bathed in a dim red, as if we were descending into the mouth of hell itself. We walked slowly down the ramp, our ears open for any threatening noises. The dim red lights only pierced a few feet in either direction, and we came upon a T-junction, one hallway disappearing right, one left. "What should we be looking for, Chancy?" whispered Gabriel. "I don't know," I answered. "Where is the thing we're looking for?" he said. "Your guess is as good as mine," I replied. "Good that you know what you're doing," he muttered. To our right, somewhere in the dark, we could hear shambling and moaning. Left, I said. Sounds good, Gabriel returned. We followed the dim red lights down the corridor, which ended at another junction. The left passage was narrow and unlit, so we decided to take the larger passageway to the right, which was still illuminated by the eerie red lights. As we made our way down the corridor, my feet slipped on something metallic. Reaching down, I could feel that the floor was carpeted with spent ammunition casings. There was a battle here, I said. It doesn't look like your guys won, answered Gabriel. We moved forwards down the corridor and were surprised to find that it ended in a huge room filled with what looked to be Mad Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory. Now, I am not a scientist, so I cannot begin to explain what kinds of machines and instruments that we saw, outside of the usual beakers and test tubes and burners that one might find in a science classroom. But the entire underground laboratory, which looked to easily be 50 feet square, had been completely demolished, as if a struggle had indeed taken place. Lab equipment had been knocked over, bullet holes pockmarked the walls, and everywhere was the stench of blood and rotting flesh. Several wooden tables also littered the floor, and papers were strewn everywhere. Gabriel picked up a handful of them and walked underneath one of the red lights. "Hey, Chancy," he said. "Can you read Japanese?" I took the papers from him. "Yeah, what does it say?" he asked. I looked at the writing and shook my head. "I don't know. It's equations and formulas and test results for some experiments which they seem to be doing on Allied soldiers. I can't make head nor tail of this, but some of the information keeps referring to transcribing the results into a master book." "Hang on," said Gabriel as he reached down under an overturned table. He pulled out a thick black book bound in black leather. "Something like this," he said as he handed it to me. I said, reading the handwritten notes in the thick journal. "What is it, Chancy?" asked Lieutenant Gabriel. "This was written by Dr. Kanazaki Hitaroshi. He is a noted biophysicist and botanist in Japan. Rumors say he is working with the military on a top-secret military project that's supposed to increase Japan's fighting strength exponentially." Lieutenant Gabriel looked over my shoulder as I read the title of the journal. It says, Operation Divine Warrior. The first entry is dated just 3 months ago. "So, your Dr. Hidoroshi was experimenting on ways to bring dead soldiers back to life," shuddered Gabriel. "That's unholy." "This is the sign of a desperate nation, I'm afraid," I said. "The dead attack anybody. They have no national loyalties. They simply kill and create more of their kind. This cannot stand." "You mentioned something about captured Allied soldiers," said Gabriel. "Does that journal say where they're kept?" I flipped through the pages. "Yes, here it is. Dr. Hitaroshi says that Allied soldiers, both living and deceased, were brought here 20 at a time and that they were kept in a room. Right over there." I pointed to another door which led to an adjoining room. We walked across the laboratory towards the other room, the stench of rot and death growing stronger. 6 of the emergency lights still operated, and what greeted us filled me with shock, terror, and disgust. Within the room were 20 wooden beds lined up in 2 rows. On each bed a corpse of an Allied service member was securely strapped by leather restraints. They lay motionless. Gabriel silently walked inside and stopped at the beds of 2 corpses. They wore American flight uniforms. "I knew these men," he whispered. "Their bomber went down almost a month ago." "I'm sorry, Lieutenant Gabriel," I replied. "Hey, look here," Gabriel said. "You said that 20 of them were kept here, but this bed is empty." He pointed to the empty bed next to his 2 fallen comrades. "The leather restraints have broken loose from the bed," I noticed. "Well, one of them got free," concluded Gabriel. "One of them got free and spread whatever this was to the entire bunker complex." It was at that moment that I stepped on another pile of spent rifle casings. This time, as I fell, I attempted to catch myself on the edge of the empty bed, which screeched as I leaned heavily against it. The sound seemed to echo across the universe. Gabriel's dead companion opened his eyes and attempted to rise, moaning loudly. The others also awoke and began moaning and gnashing their teeth, trying desperately to get up and bite at us. The racket of their banging and kicking against their restraints broke the silence of the tomb-like bunker complex. "God damn it," yelled Gabriel. "Thought you were supposed to be freaking ninjas." "What the hell is a ninja?" I yelled as we ran from the laboratory, Dr. Hitaroshi's journal clasped in my hands. We retreated back the way we came, turning the corner to hear the groaning growing louder. In the distance, we could see shambling shapes moving in the red light. Between us was the ramp which led back to the entrance of this accursed bunker. We raced towards the ramp and towards the undead coming down the opposite corridor, and we reached it just about the same time. I came face to face with the rotting vestige of 4 of the undead just an arm's length away from me, with many more behind them. I turned and ran up the ramp, Gabriel close behind me and pushing me forward. Halfway up the ramp, Gabriel turned and kicked the nearest undead ghoul in the chest, who fell backwards, knocking our pursuers back down the ramp. The few moments he bought allowed us to race up the ramp and into the welcome darkness of night. Once outside, Gabriel yelled, "Get up to the radio room." "I know," I yelled, turning left and running towards the stone steps. The undead soldier from earlier was still there, his back turned to me. I jumped up and kicked it aside, and the ghoul tumbled over into the dark. "Yeah, ninjas," I heard Gabriel mutter. "They're all fucking ninjas." I practically flew up the stone steps to the radio room. "What is this ninja, Round Eye?" I whispered. Strangely, the radio room was empty. Apparently whatever tragedy that befell this place happened so quickly that no one was able to get a radio message outside the island. It was small, no more than 2 meters by 3 meters, and contained 2 small stools and a table placed under a glass window. I quietly closed the heavy wooden door shut behind me and timidly poked my head above the open window as hundreds of the undead poured from the mouth of the entrance of the bunker. Shuddering, I crept to the makeshift table on which the radio set was placed. Grabbing the handset, I tuned the radio to the frequency which I knew that my unit back at Rabaul would be monitoring when, suddenly, I froze. I looked up to see Gabriel staring at me with his fists clenched, suspicion blazing in his eyes. I stared back at him, not knowing what brought about this renewed display of aggression. It took me a second to realize why. If I called back to my people, and if they came, the chances would be very good that Dr. Hitaroshi's unholy experiments would continue, and more than likely a captured Lieutenant Gabriel will be added as one of the test subjects. The nightmarish abominations which were created here must not be allowed to escape from this cursed place. Nodding in understanding, I turned over the handset to Gabriel. "Call your people, Lieutenant," I said. "This place and everything in it must be destroyed. Nothing here must be set free." Part 4. Lieutenant Gabriel relaxed and nodded, taking the radio handset from me. "Yeah, show me how to work this thing," he said. I guided him through the process of searching frequencies on our radio, and he began transmitting over an open Allied channel. "Any station, this is net. Any station, this net. Any station, this net. This is Flight Engineer Lieutenant Samson Gabriel, United States Army Air Force." He repeated this for several minutes, switching frequencies on the radio. Well, this was risky, as Japanese radio operators could have intercepted these transmissions, but at the moment we had little choice. "Any station, this is net. This is Flight Engineer Lieutenant Samson Gabriel, United States Army Air Force." Suddenly a voice on the other end of the radio said, "Hello, Lieutenant Gabriel. Please state your identification number, your unit, and your current location." The person on the other end had an Australian accent. Gabriel gave him all of the information he'd requested, and the Australian voice at the other end told us to wait. After an eternity of waiting, the Australian voice returned. "Hello, Lieutenant Gabriel." The annoyingly cheerful voice came. "We have a platoon of Marine Raiders coming to snatch you up in the morning. Can you be at the beach east of your current position?" "Do I have a fucking choice?" said Gabriel. "No, I suppose not, mate," said the Australian. "We're having a run of trouble with Jap patrols, so I can't give you an exact time. Just stay by your radio and we'll inform you as to when your Marines will be landing in the morning. Till then, mate, hold on and we'll be there as quickly as we can." "Yeah," said Gabriel. "Hurry up." Gabriel out. He replaced the receiver back on the radio holder and exhaled, putting his forehead in the crook of his elbow. I was sitting on the floor of the radio room, my back braced against the door. "Go ahead and grab some sleep, Lieutenant Gabriel," I said. "I'll take the first watch." But he was already snoring silently. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor in the dark, reliving nightmare after nightmare after nightmare, and questioning my beloved Emperor. How could he do this? How could he have approved of this? How could he think that this abomination against nature and against the rulers of the heavens be what is best for Japan? Below us I could hear the shambling of dead feet and the moaning of unholy voices. I don't know how long I sat there, staring out the open window and into space at the beautiful stars above, wondering what mysterious and wonderful secrets they held. I must have drifted off to sleep sometime because, sometime later I felt Gabriel shaking my shoulder. "Hey, Chinsey," he whispered. "Grab some sleep. I'll take watch now." "What time is it?" I asked. "About 4:30 in the morning," he answered, without checking his watch. "This is usually the time we get up to start the engines to our bombers." "I see," I replied as I allowed sleep to take me. He screamed the squelch of the radio, followed by the same Australian voice from last night. "Good morning, Lieutenant Gabriel. Are you there?" The moaning below us increased in intensity, and I got up, slowly peering over the edge of the open windows. Hundreds of angry, undead eyes stared back at me from below. Yeah, whispered Gabriel. "Geez, will you pipe down?" "Yeah, sorry, mate," said the Australian, more quietly now. "We have a platoon of Marine raiders landing at the beach east of your position in about 1 hour. Can you be there? Over." We could hear the sounds of shambling feet begin stumbling up the stone steps to the radio room. "I guess we don't have much of a choice, do we?" said Gabriel. "Yeah, we'll be there. Just tell them to be ready to get the hell off this damn island." The sun was creeping above the horizon as heavy dead hands pounded on the wooden door. The door shuddered as I pressed my back against it, bracing my legs against the opposite wall. Every time they beat on the door, it opened a little more. Gabriel ran up and placed his bigger and heavier frame against it. "Get your skinny ass out of here. You ain't gonna brace this door," he yelled. "Get that journal and jump out the window. It's only 10 feet to the ground." "What about you?" I yelled. "Get the hell out of the way when you land, 'cause I'll be right behind you," said Gabriel. I ran to the open window and looked down. The undead ghouls were crowding at the stone steps leading up to the radio room. There were at least 100 of them. The ground below was clear, and climbing to the ledge of the window, I leapt out, bending my knees and rolling to my side as soon as my feet hit the ground. I kept Dr. Hitaroshi's journal clutched in my arms as I jumped up, my knees buckling slightly. I looked up at the open window as Gabriel appeared on the ledge. As he made to jump, one of the undead grabbed a hold of his ankle. Off balance, Gabriel jumped awkwardly and hit both his feet on the stone steps as he fell. I heard a sickening snap as he rolled onto the grass. Shit, Gabriel yelled. He attempted to get up, but fell painfully in a heap. I ran to him and hauled him up on my shoulders, dragging and pulling him forwards towards the main entrance gate. Gabriel attempted to help by half walking and half limping, but I could tell by his grunting and heaving that he was in great pain. Many of the undead followed Gabriel out of the window, falling to the ground in bone-snapping heaps. But many more who had not already entered the radio room had seen us escaping and began shambling after us. By then, however, I had managed to get Gabriel out of the entrance at the base, and we began stumbling towards the jungle. By the time we were halfway across the open field, Gabriel was screaming in pain with every step, and I was getting weaker hauling his dead weight practically on my back. "Oh, you're not gonna make it, Chensey," grunted Gabriel. "Not with my big ass weighing your skinny ass down." "Shut up, Round Eye," I said as we stumbled past the foxhole he'd discovered earlier. The machine gun was still where we'd left it, facing back towards the bunker. Suddenly, Gabriel pushed himself off me and tumbled to the ground. "What are you doing?" I yelled. Turning over, his face etched with pain, Gabriel reached into a cargo pocket of his flight suit and pulled out a thick plastic bag. Thrusting it into my hand, he said, "Here, Chensey, make sure this gets to my family. Tell my little Samuel that Daddy loves him." He turned and hobbled back to the pit and painfully flopped inside of it. Grabbing the machine gun, he cocked the chamber and began to open fire. "Don't be a fool, Gabriel," I yelled. "You cannot defeat them all by yourself. There are too many." "Get down to the beach, Chensey," Gabriel yelled over his shoulder. "Go warn those Marines about what's going on here." "Are all you damned Americans so stupidly stubborn?" I ran back to the machine gun pit and reached down, hooking my hands around Gabriel's chest, and I hauled him up and out of the hole with a strength I did not know I possessed. "What the hell are you doing?" yelled Gabriel. "Get the fuck down to the beach, you little shit." "I'm not little, you round-eyed son of a bitch." I threw his arm across my shoulder. "Besides, I need your dumb baboon ass to get off this island. Those stupid Marines will shoot me if they saw me running towards them alone." "Yeah, good point," agreed Gabriel. "Now, lean on me and let's go." We had to cover 50 meters of relatively open ground before we made it to the tree line. I'd hoped that we could lose the shambling corpses in the thick vegetation and we could somehow sneak down to the beach. But Gabriel's legs could not support his weight, try as he might to kick himself along, and he was much bigger and heavier than me. The dead were rapidly closing behind us, maybe on top of us before we reached the tree line. But I wasn't going to leave this man. He was a decent and honorable warrior. I almost killed him in the skies above New Britain, and he was now willing to sacrifice himself to give me a chance to flee. Oh, it would be a disgrace to abandon him, but it would be an honor to stand and die by his side. "They're closing on us," he grunted. "We're not going to make it, Chensey." "I know," I said. "Now, shut up." I reached down and grabbed the hilt of my knife. Before I could turn to face the threat, we were both blown off our feet. Heat like the fires of hell erupted behind us as the air was split with explosions and the roar of propeller blades. I rolled over and looked to where we'd just come from. The ground had become a roiling sea of flames and black smoke. I couldn't see the undead through the fires and choking smoke caused by the incendiary bombs. Gabriel was lying on the ground next to me on his stomach, breathing heavily. I rolled over him again, hooking my arms around his chest, and began pulling him backwards the last few meters into the tree line. With the last of my strength, I rolled him upright under a shady bush and poured the last of my water over his head. Too weak to even stand, I crawled back to where we'd entered the trees to see if we were still being followed. The entire outpost was ablaze, and dozens of immolated undead creatures shambled aimlessly about in the fires before collapsing in a heap of blackened flesh. Above us, large silver fighter planes with their distinctive twin-tail booms dived at the outpost, dropping the last of their bombs and firing their machine guns at anything that still moved. Major Richard Bong's squadron of P-38 Lightnings had struck again. I believe that the American commander would have thought both me and Lieutenant Gabriel to have been completely insane, each of us having suffered through the trauma of being shot down and then forced to fend for ourselves on a jungle island somewhere in the South Pacific, had it not been for the corroboration of the Marines who'd rescued us and the tales of horror which they'd witnessed and testified to in hushed and terrified tones. I worked tirelessly with US military intelligence, deciphering the journals and notes which we'd taken from the research facility, the American intelligence officers becoming as horrified as I was to learn of the unholy experiments which Dr. Hitaroshi had been conducting on the honored dead Japanese and Allied warriors. 2 days after we'd fully deciphered and transcribed all of Hitaroshi's documents, the Americans completely destroyed all evidence of Operation Divine Warrior in a pit of fire while a force of B-29 bombers was sent to completely obliterate the research facility. The next day, the Americans sent another squadron of B-29 bombers to carpet bomb the island, this time using incendiary bombs. On that day, though I was technically a prisoner of war, the Americans gave me permission to briefly visit Lieutenant Gabriel as he was resting comfortably at a field hospital, both his legs in a cast and elevated above his head. He was awaiting transport to one of the American hospital ships. 3 big MPs stood around the bed, perhaps more for my protection than to protect Lieutenant Gabriel. And it was understandable, as in the eyes of the courageous wounded in that field hospital, I was still the enemy. I sat next to him and retrieved a small plastic bag from my pocket, handing it to Gabriel. "Please take these," I said. "I pray that they carry you home safely to your wife and your family." He smiled, taking out the picture of his son Samuel and his attractive wife, his worn Holy Bible, his dog tags, and his wedding ring. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why did you come back for me? Why did you help us destroy Hitoroshi's work? Had it come to fruition, it may have changed the fortunes of war in Japan's favor." I sighed. There will come a time in every warrior's life when he must decide whether or not he's doing the right thing, and in that moment his decision is what will separate him from either being a true warrior for good or a mindless monster who does only what he is told. What Hitoroshi was doing was evil, and I pray that your forces were successful in erasing that abomination. This war, like all wars, will eventually end and either Japan or the Allies will emerge victorious. But if the nightmare on that island were allowed to escape, then I fear that we will all be cursed to fight a war between the living and the dead. "Are all Japanese as long-winded as you, Chensi?" smirked Gabriel. He smiled and shook my hand. "Hey, thank you for coming back for me. You know, that was actually my final mission. I was about to return home to the States when we were shot down." I bowed, realizing that my moment had come to either confess what I'd done or let the secret haunt me forever. "Lieutenant Gabriel," I said, my voice unsure and quivering, "I have a confession to make." "You were the one who shot me down and killed my crew," Gabriel answered matter-of-factly. "I know." "You knew?" I asked. "The entire time that we were together, you knew?" "I knew the second I saw Major Bong shoot you down and I watched you bail out of your fighter," answered Gabriel. "You had reason to avenge the deaths of your comrades," I said. "Why did you not kill me when you had the chance?" Gabriel shrugged. "Like you said, Chensi, comes a time when you have to decide whether to do what is right or what's wrong. Oh, don't get me wrong, I'll mourn the loss of my friends until the day I die. I'm glad you're alive. Hope that you make it back to Japan. They'll need good people like you to help them rebuild and to teach future generations that war is not how to settle our differences." I smiled. "You speak as if your side has already won, my friend." "Well, we haven't," said Gabriel. "Not yet." I nodded and stood up, rendering a salute to the brave American warrior. To his credit, Gabriel returned my salute, saying, "When this is all over, maybe we can get a beer." "I would like that, Lieutenant Gabriel." As the 3 MPs led me back to my holding cell, I knew that I'd never see Lieutenant Samson Gabriel again. I was eventually transferred to an Australian ship which took me to a POW camp in Queensland, where I remained until the end of the war. I was somewhat of an oddity, as we, Japanese, especially Japanese pilots, were not known for surrendering. Most of us who had been captured were wounded and either did not have the ability to resist capture or the ability to commit seppuku. Eventually, when the war finally ended, I was repatriated back to the Japanese homelands, and the rest, as is so often said, is history. And it is this that I leave for you, my beloved daughter Inayusha, and to my grandsons Haruki and Natsuo, and my beloved granddaughter Noriko, and to my great-grandchildren Reiji and the twins Akiro and Hichiro. Be warriors of light. Be the flame in the dark which inspires hope among those who have none. Be true to these values which I hope I have instilled in you. Be smart, be kind, be brave. Always tell the truth. Have self-respect and, above all, have faith in God. Finally, if you ever see the spectre of evil rise, I pray that, in that moment, you'll choose to be the warrior who fought for what is right no matter what government which you serve allegiance to. For your honor is not bound by a flag, but by what you've done to serve the greater good. May eternal love be with you and to those of our coming generation who will carry the flame of hope into the future, perhaps even to the stars. Todorishi Chensi, Honolulu, Hawaii, 2013. Ichiro Chensi carefully closed the memoir written so long ago by her great-grandfather and reverently handed it back to her mother, Noriko. "Thank you for letting me read it one more time," said Ichiro to her mother. Ichiro's mother nodded, carefully placing Grandfather Todorishi's handwritten memoir back into a box, which also contained his awards, ribbons, medals, and other memories of a long-forgotten time when the world was at war. Noriko looked at her daughter, the youngest of her 3 children, as Ichiro was born only 2 minutes after her twin brother Akiro. "Are you sure that you want to do this, Ichiro?" She smiled and nodded, hugging her mother. Tomorrow was September 6th, Ichiro's 18th birthday. She only wanted to do one thing to celebrate her birthday, and that was go to the recruiting station as soon as they opened and begin the process of becoming a United States Marine just like her father and his father before him. They sat silently for a while in the large kitchen of the 2-story home which great-grandfather Todorishi had built in Oahu, overlooking the waters of the Pacific Ocean. It was nighttime, and Ichiro walked out onto the wide stone patio, the same patio which great-grandfather dictated his memoirs. She looked up into a night sky brilliant with stars. "Carry the flame of hope into the future, and perhaps even to the stars," Ichiro thought.